Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant, independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours.
Sunday, June 16th, 2024. Thank you for joining me today. Probably going to be a long show, so get settled in. We got a lot to cover, a lot to talk about. Mostly covered around the different parts in the title around Israel, Nusrat, the follow-up of the UN discussions, their own reports about what they saw around that, as well as a larger report highlighting a lot of the things we've already discussed, but really kind of solidifying the perspective from the international community, what's actually going on the ground that challenges a lot of the central arguments coming from Israel. We're going to discuss an interesting development around the humanitarian aid side, the ceasefire, the interesting kind of like all the rest of these current developments where half of the Israeli conversation is saying one thing, the other half is saying something else around some kind of a pause around the Rafah area, the humanitarian aid situation around that. We're going to discuss kind of all these ongoing lies. We're going to start with something I kind of coined the title as the Great Partisan Reset. It's something that I've talked about a lot in the mainstream alternative media, but interestingly framed around both Twitter and a conversation kind of around that as usual, the whole saving free speech dynamic, but an overlap with the Great Reset and the different concerning parts there. And that's kind of, it's on my mind. I already set up an entire show based off something that I was researching for a segment I did with Allison Morrow that we've already talked a lot about, the Internet of Bodies, nanotechnology. And it's just been on my mind since I talked about that. And as you know, it's something that's always sort of one of my biggest concerns about, any topic you point at today, that's one that really keeps me up at night. And I'm probably over the next couple of shows going to do a focus just on that. But that's my point, is that being on my mind, I kind of wanted to make this point about my concern around, the Great Reset, as you're all well aware of what that is. And it doesn't just apply to technology. It's sort of kind of like the idea of using partisan narratives and political manipulations to reinvent what they are, whatever you think they is in this conversation, reinvent the direction, from a government perspective. Like I see a lot of this happening right now, almost out of desperation, necessity, because of what Israel's created, this need to sort of like reinvent what they are and what they're fighting for. And I wanted to frame this around the mainstream alternative media part of this, in this cool reinvention of a lot of different perspectives and frames of certain entities and platforms around the idea that something is now shifted, whether it's the mainstream alternative media, whether it's the idea about how their coverage has now suddenly shifted around Israel because of the necessity to do so. It's a lot of interesting points, but this is specifically around obvious overlap to those things. But we're also going to touch on actually a couple of points in the beginning around some quick points about the recent discussion of the financial stuff, and some interesting overlaps around propaganda, and really just the starting point. I really wanted to highlight rather in between the discussions I pointed out around the Nusrat conversation and aid, just some really striking articles coming out of Haaretz that are from an Israeli Jewish perspective that just blow me away, even though I keep highlighting this stuff about how the U.S. government says one thing, even the Israeli government will say something else, but then the populations, whether of U.S. or even Israel itself, are challenging all of that, screaming that they want a deal no matter what they're offering, as long as they get their people back. And that seems to be a majority opinion at this point. You're not hearing that from any corporate media, save for maybe like we're going to talk about from these Haaretz conversations, where you'll get the random article that comes through that says exactly what you're not supposed to say about what they're doing, about what they're fighting for, about what they believe. It's just important, using that alongside the United Nations reports. I mean, again, I really don't know how anybody is incapable of seeing what this really is. So again, back to the point about the partisan mainstream alternative media, there's people whose entire, really, I wouldn't, before I even say that, not even the people we're going to point at today, but really a lot of these right-wing media seem to be really invested in the Israeli conversation to a point to where it doesn't seem they're even able to pull back from what's happening, going down with that ship, as it were. But we'll talk about a lot of this as we go forward. I'm going to start with a couple of quick points. And again, this is about the financial stuff. I wanted to highlight this. I noticed that there were some people that were, which is, it's not hard to figure this stuff out. The people that I'm discussing, one of the people that's suing me, the law firm that's suing me, and so on, it's public information. They're out there. You can find their account and so on. But I wasn't going to try to be like, this is who they are. Look out, other than showing you their public website and so on, but it looks like some people have found them and were highlighting them online. I think Orwell is the one that really sent that to me, and I want to just make a point about this. Not to say that she was the one doing that, but just highlighting that was happening. I wanted to highlight this really quickly so you guys can see this. So this is one of the people that is suing me. Now, the only reason I'm showing it now, one, because it's public information, but just because I want to make a point about this, that's people are, make it quick and simple. I don't think it's necessary or important or even right that people go after somebody like this, even if you think it's unjust, what's happening, which I do. The point, nonetheless, is that this is still his copyright. And so ultimately this person, I don't know where this is coming from, whether the individual is the one making this happen, or this is something that, somebody threw out there was that I believe this is sort of weaponized through most likely the law firm. And my point would be, it would be as simple as them reaching out to that person and going, hey, do you want us to do this for you for free? And they'd be like, why not? So I want to make that clear that I don't think it's ever right to make it a personal, hounding harassment kind of an issue. I don't think that's right in any case. And frankly, they could make a case about that, but this is public information. So I wanted to make that clear that is out there and to take the high road about it. And ultimately this as well is the Sanders Law Group. Both of these are being pointed at. Nonetheless, it's all public information. So what this is about, if you haven't seen the update on these things, is this clip. We have a clip right here that Jason put out. And Donald Best, who I greatly respect, former police officer, investigator now, just posted this about this clip. And this clip is basically updating you on a small part of this ongoing thing. And just to quickly reiterate, the bottom line is, that in what I do on this platform, I act in good faith in what I do, where in some cases, things we use, I argue fall under fair use, which would be images that are out there of, war crime, different images of certain things we're covering, which even then people may try to make an issue, but I argue fair use is a huge part of this for a platform like us, a media platform. But then there are some where I try to get Creative Commons because there's certain aspects of it that I argue are necessary. So I do my best. I take my best effort to find what are Creative Commons. But as you guys know, there's not some special way to find Creative Commons other than the tabs that are on Google and so on. And it turns out, as I'm now finding out, those aren't actually all the time Creative Commons. So when I was made aware of that, I take it down, I change it. The point is that I'm getting this sort of compounding weaponized action behind this, where people are asking for like $30,000 for the use of one image that I made no money from, even though I took effort to remove it, and so on. And I cover this in the conversation in this clip, as well as the actual show you should watch. I feel like this is being weaponized against me, and I go into it more in detail if you can watch here, because there's really no way for me as an individual to know for sure. And so then I get into a place where they're suing you, and the only way to fight it costs, 50 grand or more, which I don't have because I'm an average person. Or I can just accept what they're asking for, which is a ridiculous amount of money. So I lose either way. My point is this whole system, especially this part, seems to be weaponized against the not rich, or specifically independent media. So I really genuinely feel there's something wrong happening here. And I think it needs to be addressed in a larger sense. Donald Best simply highlighted this. My good friend Ryan Christian is the last American vagabond. For decades, he and his friends have been covering the stories that so many won't. He said, years ago, Ryan covered my story of how I was wrongfully convicted and imprisoned for contempt of court, which, my God, if you have not seen our talk on that story, I've interviewed him and done, I think even Aaron Mate and I back then did the conversation about this. It's wild. He was convicted wrongly. And I mean, like in the worst insidious sense, where they lied knowingly behind the scenes, like conspired literally to get him to go to jail for something he didn't do, went to jail for it, ultimately had to fight back, and ultimately cleared his name by proving not only that they lied, but that it was manufactured. The judge and it was crazy. The idea that we all know that's possible, but when you can prove and see that it happened, where a judge and people involved in this, not just the other side of the prosecutor, but like people behind the scenes in this that are supposed to be the impartial aspects, were colluding to put this person in jail, and he won, and they got in trouble for it. It just shows you that, anyway, it's a powerful story, but this stuff happens, So on a side note, just recognize that, just because we like to believe we have certain things that work in our interest, the system itself, there's politics in all of it. But he says, when I was later vindicated, most of the media ignored the truth, but not Ryan. I encourage you to stop by his website and have a look at the fine work he does. And appreciate that, Donald. You're a good man. And I just want you guys to check this out in general to recognize where this is going. As I said before, I will not stop doing this. I'm going to keep doing this no matter what, whether it's from my room somewhere with a phone or not. It's important to me. but I'm worried that this will end up trying to go after what we have in general here, TLAV and so on. So as always, we need your support. But I would want to say this too. For those of you out there that have always supported us, I almost want to say, there's so many people out there that are, not affluent. They don't have lots of money and yet are the ones probably donating more than ever to TLAV. And that's not what I want. It's important. If you guys are already supporting us, that's what I want from you. I don't want people that are, the good ones out there doing twice as much just to make sure, I think that's important to say, even though I greatly appreciate it and it means everything to us. I worry that you get the people out there that can't afford it. They're ultimately the ones trying to do more, and it means the world to me. But I think it's important that, the whole $1 a month kind of thing. Anybody out there listening, if you find value in what we're doing, being ahead of so many stories or just covering things from an interesting perspective or just being nonpartisan, $1 a month is all we're ever asking from everybody across the board. We've got millions of followers out there. That's all you would ever need. That's the whole value for value concept. So thank you for all of you out there supporting us. Now here's the show in which we discuss this. TLAV Lawfare, as I kind of framed it. This is a real article about this group, Sanders Law Group, and its infamous legal trolling scam. So check it out for yourself. Now, on the note of on that conversation of manipulations and spam and so on, I want to make sure you guys saw this. I've said this before already, and this is not new by any stretch of the imagination, but it seems to be really a lot of it happening right now, especially on Twitter. We'll get to it in a second. But this was somebody reached out to me and said, hey, make sure you know about this. This person's pretending to be you. And it's already happened on Telegram more than once. And one of them has even gotten taken down or they removed it. I don't know. Telegram doesn't seem to be very responsive about this stuff. It says, be aware, people. I said, be aware, people are pretending to be TLAV all over the place. It really is. Pretty much every platform I can find somebody pretending to be me. This is fake TLAV Telegram account trying to get people to download wallets to likely send crypto. I would never, hear me on this, never ask you to do anything but share the work and direct you to our public page info for if you want to donate. Like really, I want to make sure you understand that if you're engaging somewhere and it's like some DM from someone looks like me and I'm like, hey, let me do this for you. Let's do this for me. Like it's not me. Okay. Unless you know me personally and there's something else going on, this is not going to be, I will never do that. So just be aware of that. There are people out there trying to pretend that they are us in order to, one, probably make you think that we're something that we're not, or just frame us for something. I mean, there's a lot of insidious stuff happening right now. And it's not even just some kind of Hasbara, Israel, Zionist kind of thing. This stuff's been going on long before that. And not just from, the U.S. government or any other intelligence apparatus, whether you think that's this level or not, or in TLAV in general, it does exist out there. Or just average individual people who just hate because we're saying something they disagree with, which we'll get to in a second, and we'll go after you for whatever reason. So just be aware of that, as well as on Twitter. We talked about this just the other day. It's funny. I was just saying the whole, hey, my sister saw your profile. Apparently that's just like the only thing they're doing right now. Like everybody I talk to is exactly the same thing. And I've never seen it this bad. And suddenly, what's interesting about it, as I tag in this right here, I think, well, that's not the one. It's right there. I'll show you this next. This is, I think, did I close it? It's right there. Censored Man. But this is the whole point about the AutoTix Israeli verification thing. If you haven't seen this, it's super important. The reality being that Elon Musk went to meet in Israel to discuss more than just the IDF propaganda tour. It was about meetings between him and all these different high-level people about how to influence information through Twitter. And now suddenly they're using a Israeli intelligence level ID verification system so you can use Twitter. Taking your biometrics, it's Censored Man has been breaking this down. It's very obvious, and I knew I was going to grab it, but here's mine in case you wanted to watch this episode. But as I said before, what Censored Man has been breaking down about this is much, much deeper than what we covered already on this. This was just ahead of the story in general on December, highlighting that was happening. The Israeli unit 8200 Tide Company runs Twitter verification. But it's really concerning to see that this group is a part, if not, completely running this whole discussion. And this is and the other group, an Israeli company they've hired on top of that, are supposed to be the ones that are battling the bots on X. Well, seeing as how it's worse than I've ever seen it in my life, I wonder if they're only, stopping not Israeli bots. Are we pretending that's not obvious? Israel's been open about this. Anyway, just recognize how weird. Oh, here's Decentered News. Send in Unit 8200. It's on the way. And then this one I thought was interesting. Now, even highlight this stuff because I hate to give these people any kind of attention at all. But I think it's really important to recognize, because I think this is just funny. One, I think this guy is the most hilariously stupid person or people. I'm sure it's not just one person. It's probably just some bot trade-off system. But occasionally I've highlighted this for Twitter just to see what they do, proving it, having every, the different 8-9 different links to 8-9 different accounts, all with the same name variation, with the same, and you could prove that they're all saying the same. It's crazy. And I even had them respond going, "Oh, we see no violation there." Like, Twitter clearly does not want to see this if it's angled in a certain way. My point is, this is somebody that I did this same image and account, and you can see right here for those in the podcast. It's just, and this is like the 5th time they've changed up the variation. I forget even what it was before. This now says like some, whatever, you can see it right there. The name, the same number of letters, numbers, and then like an additional like AA at the end or whatever, one after another. And the moment I block them, a new one starts like right afterward or the next day, which makes me feel that it's tailored specifically to me, which, hey, it's a badge of honor. I love it. And again, laughing, if you can read this for yourself, once you look at the links, he's just really, really stupid and makes comments that everybody laughs about. So it's not like it worries me at all, but the point is that it's very, very, very prevalent and they're letting it happen. It's important. Now, that's being said, because I want to talk about this whole problematic overlap with the mainstream alternative media and the buildup for something that I see coming. Now, I actually want to start with this video. It's about 6 minutes, but I want to play this. It's from Shay Bose shared this. And there's some things in here that I don't agree with toward the end that sort of like frame, I think Trump is sort of like the unsung, the hero that's being suppressed. I think, if I remember correctly, I've only watched it once. But what I love about this clip, and it's fantastic overall, is that it really does show you the surreptitious nature of our intelligence, the entities in the United States, and how this about Google or the internet in general, and these concepts that we fight back, right? I agree with that, but were created to suppress us. And I believe that's what's happening now. And it's not a unique opinion with Twitter and the rest of it. Like, I very much align with what David Icke thinks about a lot of this. And a lot of people that are making that point, that we are being manipulated aggressively into falling into the categories that they're creating for us that are just variations of the two-party illusion with the same damn people, by the way, who just suddenly don't have a place with the mainstream. It feels very manipulative. And maybe they don't even know that. My opinion. But I want to watch this first because it's important to see how this works. Now, keeping in mind the idea of the bots and the manipulation and the Israeli overlap and all of that. So let's watch this clip first, and then we're going to talk a bit about Elon Musk as the greatest threat to the NWO. I'll let that sit in your mind as we play this video.
Free speech on the internet was an instrument of statecraft almost from the outset of the privatization of the internet in 1991. We quickly discovered through the efforts of the Defense Department, the State Department, and our intelligence services that people were using the internet to congregate on blogs and forums. And free speech was championed more than anybody by the Pentagon, the State Department, and our CIA cutout NGO blob architecture as a way to support dissident groups around the world in order to help them overthrow authoritarian governments as they were sort of billed. Essentially.
So right there, I think that's interesting to resonate on, right? To think about the idea that, don't, as with any form of information, especially when it's like documentary form, don't ever just blindly accept what's being said. But I genuinely agree with this. And I think it's interesting to think about is that you've seen the CIA and these different entities use these ideas. Like right now today, but these, free radio this or the National Endowment for Democracy, these are framed as humanitarian or democracy spreaders, and all they do is create regime change. Not all they do, but realistically, that's what they're aimed at. It's a shield. It's a ploy. And this has been basically admitted by even people within these groups. What they're talking about here is using the general idea of free speech, like driving these through groups to promote these ideas. And maybe even, and this is important, even using the idea of actual free speech in countries that may not have what we would argue is complete free speech, or just, again, free speech, absolute is free speech, and using that as a manipulative tool. So in the same way that the U.S. would argue that Russia uses the truth to manipulate us, right? Doesn't mean the truth shouldn't be acknowledged or that's even happening, but you can still consider that can happen. They can use the truth to manipulate you in ways that benefit them. But my point's always been, regardless, the truth is it's the truth. So we should be engaging with it. But my point is to come in with something and say, you don't have free speech, you're being suppressed, create these groups that push back against the government, but then manipulate them. The outcome is not to get them free speech, you understand? It's to get them to revolt or react against the power that they don't want you to be siding with in order to destabilize, to manipulate, which ultimately ends up at the detriment of the very people that they're manipulating to fight for their own freedom. Now, it would be different if their actions were rooted in actually fighting for freedom. Pretty sure we can all prove that's not the reality based on everything we can look at around the world. Show me one country that's end up more free after their liberation, in quotes, from the U.S. government. It's not how this works. They're batting zero in that regard. So think about that as we go through this, the idea of supplanting, and the same thing with whether it's Twitter and the free speech, not reach kind of game. It's all happening again.
Internet free speech allowed insta-regime change operations to be able to facilitate the foreign policy establishment's State Department agenda. Google is a great example of this. Google began as a DARPA grant by Larry Page and Sergey Brin when they were Stanford PhDs. They got their funding as part of a joint CIA-NSA program to chart how, quote, birds of a feather flock together online through search engine aggregation. And
you could argue right there that the point might even be like, well, hey, let them say what they want. We can then catalog, right, who's in what group. And this is one of the sentiments you used to get a lot and sometimes still do. You know, like when they legalize cannabis, oh, you're all falling for the trap. They're just going to mark down who all does it. And you're all going to get arrested. Like I think we're way past that point. I don't think that's even likely even on their mind. But then early in this field, you could have argued that might have been the case. But I argue clearly that the internet and all of these things are wildly outside of their control at this point, which is why they're trying to bring it back in with digital censorship and social credit and digital IDs and that kind of stuff. But it's interesting to think about, right? Because I do think that was originally some kind of part of this that they've lost control of.
Then 1 year later, they launched Google and then became a military contractor quickly. They got Google Maps by purchasing a CIA satellite software, essentially. And the ability to use free speech on the internet as a way to circumvent state control over media all around the world was seen as a way to be able to do what used to be done out of CIA station houses or out of embassies or consulates in a way that was totally turbocharged. And all of the internet free speech technology was initially created by our national security state. VPNs, virtual private networks to hide your IP address, Tor, the dark web, to be able to buy and sell goods anonymously.
One of the reasons people, and myself included, often argue that we shouldn't trust these things to be complete the bottom line is it's like possible, if not likely, that these things aren't as secure as we think that they are because of that. Doesn't mean that maybe again, that's something that's out of their control. I don't know. Use them if you think. I would anyway, just in case. But I think that's interesting to think about. Also, I would say in no way does this mean that we shouldn't be endorsing free speech, right? That's not the point being made here. It's that they use things, even genuine things, in order to manipulate.
Anonymously, end-to-end encrypted chats. All of these things were created initially as DARPA projects or as joint CIA-NSA projects to be able to help intelligence-backed groups to overthrow governments that were causing a problem to the Clinton administration or the Bush administration or the Obama administration. And this plan worked magically from about 1991 until about 2014 when there began to be an about face on internet freedom and its utility.
Now, interesting time right there. I don't know if I would put the pin right at 2014, but it's interesting to think about the timing, right? Because I think that, obviously, I think that's just a good date in general, maybe the apex of it. It's hard to say that it wasn't building before that, but interesting timing, right? What's 2014? The Ukraine coup. There's a lot of other things around it, but it's interesting around Azov movement, Israel overlap. Just what's relevant, especially for today. But a lot of things seem to shift around that time. Russia, there's a lot of interesting games right there. And so the question is, was this all part of that? But in any case, that these things shifted into a point at which I would argue more so they started at least to act as if they needed to suppress back what I think was being used in their interest because it was now being used by individuals. But again, a long time before that, obviously. My point being that we are using the internet, we're using our free speech and different actions to in real time actually hurt, affect, if not stop what they're trying to accomplish, right? That's never what they wanted to happen. Quite honestly, the idea is that they pretend they want us to have these things because they're good altruistic people, but it's not the case. And now we're all seeing that. We're not allowed to say what we want because that's illegal or it's dangerous or you're hurting somebody. That's where we are.
2014, after the coup in Ukraine, there was an unexpected counter-coup where Crimea and the Donbass broke away. And they broke away with essentially a military backstop that NATO was highly unprepared for at the time. They had one last Hail Mary chance, which was the Crimea annexation vote. And when the hearts and minds of the people of Crimea voted to join the Russian Federation, that was the last straw for the concept of free speech on the internet in the eyes of NATO. As they saw it, the fundamental nature of war changed at that moment. An industry had been created that spanned the Pentagon, the British Ministry of Defense, and Brussels into a organized political warfare outfit, essentially infrastructure that was created, initially stationed in Germany and in Central and Eastern Europe, basically to create the ability to have the military work with the social media companies to censor Russian propaganda or to censor domestic right-wing populist groups in Europe who were rising in political power at the time because of the migrant crisis.
And see, we've talked about this overlap with, as Whitney and I've discussed way later, but the statement, we see it building, we just don't know how to stop it. It's the domestic terrorism. It's the same thing. And the idea now is that anybody, and it's not clearly that even, as I think we pointed out with Azov and the Russian overlap and the US CIA manipulation within it, lost control of that because I think they just don't have as much influence as they used to. But it's all very clear that it was about trying to shut down anybody, left or right, or aware of the illusion that simply were challenging narratives as a dangerous person, a violent person, vanilla ISIS, a MAGA terrorist, and look, the point was that there were people on the left that were clearly being shut down within those narratives that weren't necessarily a right-wing anything. It was all just about using these things as vehicles to suppress speech that's inconvenient for the establishment.
When Brexit happened in 2016, that was this crisis moment where suddenly they didn't have to worry just about Central and Eastern Europe anymore. It was coming westward, this idea of Russian control over hearts and minds. And so Brexit was June 2016. The very next month at the Warsaw Conference, NATO formally amended its charter to expressly commit to hybrid warfare as this new NATO capacity. So they went from basically 70 years of tanks to this explicit capacity building for censoring tweets that they were deemed to be Russian proxies. And again, it's not just Russian propaganda. These were now Brexit groups or groups like Matteo Salvini in Italy or in Greece or in Germany or in Spain with the Vox Party. Now, at the time,
or anything to broaden this a little bit further out from a two-party perspective that they were uncomfortable with. That's what I think is important about this. Is it's not even about, that's what he said, it's not Russia propaganda. It's just whatever they don't like under the guise of Russian propaganda. And this is the point about Russia going, they did this and your government did that. So just, whether I saw Russia ever say that, and I'm like, hey, our government did this, now suddenly I'm spreading Russian propaganda. But I didn't take that from, that was my idea. That's how that ultimately works. But it's not just even Russian propaganda. It's a simple framework that works for anything they want to shut down as long as they create the boogeyman first. And we're seeing that everywhere.
NATO was publishing white papers saying that the biggest threat NATO faces is not actually a military invasion from Russia. It's losing domestic elections across Europe to all these right-wing populist groups who, because they were mostly working-class movements, were campaigning on cheap Russian energy at a time when the U.S. was pressuring this energy diversification policy.
You could also argue that we're talking about a fascist kind of versus, what's the best way to frame it? As Witness covered, like the division within, the old neocon mindset versus sort of, where you could see these kind of back and forth where the groups that are rising there are a problem in the eyes of the people trying to maintain the old status quo. But in no way would I argue that they're on the side of the people either.
They made the argument, after Brexit, now the entire rules-based international order would collapse unless the military took control over media. Because Brexit would give rise to Frexit in France with Marine Le Pen, to Spexit in Spain with the Vox Party, to Italexit in Italy, to Grexit in Germany, to Grexit in Greece. The EU would come apart, so NATO would be killed without a single bullet being fired. Not only that, now that NATO's gone, now there's no enforcement arm for the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, or the World Bank. So now the financial stakeholders who depend on the battering ram of the national security state would basically be helpless against governments around the world. So from their perspective, if the military did not begin to censor the internet, all of the democratic institutions and infrastructure that gave rise to the modern world after World War II would collapse. The battle for hearts and minds had been something that we had been giving ourselves a long moral license leash since 1948. One of the godfathers of the CIA, George Kennan, 12 days after we rigged the Italian election in 1948 by stuffing ballot boxes boxes and working with the mob, published a memo called The Inauguration of Organized Political Warfare, where he said, listen, it's a mean old world out there. We at the CIA just rigged the Italian election. We had to do it because if the communists won, maybe there'd never be another election in Italy again. But it's really effective, guys. We need a Department of Dirty Tricks to be able to do this around the world. And it's essentially a new social contract we're constructing with the American people, because this is not the way we've conducted diplomacy before. But
now, here's what's interesting. You could argue that they were the good guys who just recognized they're doing bad things. So if we don't do them too, we're going to lose. And so they do bad things, work with the mob and lie and cheat and steal, regime change. But it's a very self-serving argument to say they very well could be just as bad as the other side doing the same things. It's my point. But it's certainly possible that originally that was the case, but after years and years and elections and regime changes and just unaccountability and rampant lawlessness, we look back and look, you're in fact the bad guy now and have been for a long time. And I think that's important to think about, that either way, I mean, you could still argue that ultimately staved off some massive rise in communism and fascism. It's certainly possible, but my mindset's always the same. I don't see it's government. It's centralized government. Whatever government you're talking about, whatever style, it ends up in centralized control at the top. We're watching it happen right now. This game they play where they're the communists that are the trouble. I mean, it's all. I think they're all the same. Whether it's democracy, communism, Nazism, Zionism, I think at the end of the day, they're all problems. That's the government perspective for me, but I know that's not everybody's opinion. But I think that's what's interesting about people trying to frame that I'm taking one side over the other when I'm anti all government, quite frankly. But I think it's important to see that.
Essentially, what ended up happening there is we created this foreign domestic firewall. We said that we have a Department of Dirty Tricks to be able to rig elections, to be able to control media, to be able to meddle in the internal affairs of every other plot of dirt in the country, this sort of sacred dirt on which the American homeland sits. They are not allowed to operate there. The State Department, the Defense Department, and the CIA are all expressly forbidden from operating on U.S. soil.
Except the Smith Modernization Act changed that, right? We all know that. I don't think he mentions that in here. And the point being is that the Smith Modernization Act, which is a change to the Smith-Mundt Act, which was about that, not allowing these things to happen, even though, as he points out, they always did. The point was when they legalized it, it just became even more rampant than it ever was.
This is so far from the case, it's not even funny, but that's because of a number of laundering tricks that they've developed over 70 years of doing this. But essentially, there was no moral quandary at first with respect to the creation of the censorship industry when it started out in Germany and in Lithuania and Latvia and Estonia and in Sweden and Finland. There began to be a more diplomatic debate about it after Brexit, and then it became full throttle when Trump was elected. And what little resistance there was washed over by the rise and saturation of Russiagate, which basically allowed them to not have to deal with the moral ambiguities of censoring your own people.
Now, here's an important point about Trump, right? There's one of two ways that I look at this. I don't believe that Trump is the hero that's going to save everything. I think that's been proven 45 times over. I hope I'm wrong. Just like always, I hope as he gets selected this next time that somehow I'm wrong and he's everything you guys all think he might be. But I think the evidence so far proves that's not the case. So I think in this case, what we're seeing here was the effort to use him, or he was a willing part in doing all of this. The whole, engineered collapse concept of using Trump to be the justification for why it all fell apart. But that's my opinion. Maybe he is the one that's the, suppressed one. What's the right framing of it? The person that was supposed to, the good guy that's being attacked and suppressed because he's going to do the right thing. I don't believe that, but I always hold out hope for that opinion.
Because if Trump was a Russian asset, you no longer really had a traditional free speech issue. It was a national security issue. It was only after Russiagate died in July 2019 when Robert Mueller basically choked on the stand for 3 hours and revealed he had absolutely nothing after 2.5 years of investigation that the foreign to domestic switcheroo took place, where they took all of this censorship architecture spanning DHS, the FBI, the CIA, the DOD, the DOJ, and then the thousands of government-funded NGOs and private sector mercenary firms were all transited from a foreign predicate, a Russian disinformation predicate, to a democracy predicate by saying that disinformation is not just a threat when it comes from the Russians, it's actually an intrinsic threat to democracy itself. By that, they were able to launder the entire democracy promotion regime change toolkit just in time for the 2020 election.
Right. And again, I very much think that. I mean, the idea that, it doesn't have to be Trump is the good guy just because they were manipulating the election. And I don't mean votes, by the way. I don't believe your vote translates to the outcome. We'll get into all that as we get close to the election. But the point is that I think that there was a very clear manipulation of all of that. And I don't know whether Trump was a knowing part in it. I don't know. But I think this is a really interesting thing to think about. Not just the endpoint of kind of this democracy regime change engine that they've brought here, which has always in a way been here, but I think we're watching this play out. I mean, every election now, it's chaos, I think, by design. But the bigger point I'm making is about how these things can be weaponized, right? And just look at it this way, my opinion aside, apply this logic and possibility to what we're looking at today. What seems very similar to that, right? They're not making new search engines, right? So what are we talking about? Twitter, the town square, the manipulation within it of creating this new version, this new direction that I think is just rife with obvious problems and major red flags. And a lot of people are sleepwalking into it. And again, I hope that I'm wrong. I mean, why would anybody hope that Elon is not saving free speech? Of course, I hope that he's saving. It's just not what's happening as far as I can tell. Holding out for you guys to prove that I'm wrong. But I think the evidence is quite clear. So this was, again, Shay Bowes who shared this. And there's not a link to something larger. But if there is, I mean, maybe this is, no, there's a different link down here. But in any case, check it out. Check him out for this. This is just where I saw it. So I thought that was really interesting. It's a good little breakdown clip. So let's talk about this one. So here's Alex Jones on the 13th saying Elon Musk is the greatest threat to the NWO. I mean, to me, it's just a striking statement. How is that? I mean, again, I hope I'm wrong, but the evidence is overwhelming in the wrong direction. A military contractor, lines up with every box of the Great Reset. I mean, literally every aspect of it, from shots to, everything. And I'll play the video next. So I just am very worried about that. Now, I hope I'm wrong about them as well. Maybe it is just that maybe I'm wrong about all of it. Maybe it is that they don't know that they're missing it, if I'm right. I'm not going to say I know for sure, but I just find it hard to believe, overlapping this with larger points about their coverage on Israel or other major things. It's very concerning for me that I feel like people are being manipulated into another version of the mainstream media. It's when we're all watching that combust, melt down in front of us. So I'll just play the opening of this. This is what they say.
Musk, because I cannot bitch at a gift horse. I cannot look at somebody where I'm reaching 10 to 15 million people a day on X and I'm not being censored and the real me can be seen and then like, well, he's doing this, he's doing that. But
that's right. I wanted to comment on that first. And I'll pull back and I'll start it again. Think about the statement. I'm not going to complain about a gift horse. I mean, there's only one clear implication to that or statement he made. Just blatant statement. If you're benefiting, why am I going to complain? Well, some great journalism right there, right? And who cares? Well, yeah, we're getting a lot out of it. So, I mean, there's no way to misunderstand that. I'm not going to complain, or he used the B word, about a gift horse. But, well, okay, what if the gift horse gives you 10 million views, but he's also supplanting democracy, or whatever you want to frame it as, or censoring people and pretending free speech is there, or having you all sleepwalk into the Great Reset? Well, shouldn't that matter? No, well, we're getting 10, 50 million reach, so I'm not going to. That's pretty crazy to me.
To the gift horse, I cannot look at Elon Musk because I cannot bitch at a gift horse. I cannot look at somebody where I'm reaching 10 to 15 million people a day on X and I'm not being censored and the real me can be seen and then like, well, he's doing this, he's doing that. But Elon, what?
We'll just brush right over that. I'll show you what he's doing this and he's doing that means after this.
Give us a few minutes on Elon Musk because I think he needs to be protected and defended. He's in a lot of danger. He's really stuck his neck out there. And I think we're idiots if we don't back him.
Well, it's very objective, right? I'm like, well, it could be wrong. Who knows? You're stupid if you don't believe everything I'm saying. Go.
Well, I think the first thing you said is the truest thing. Judge a tree by its fruits. Anyone who's not against me is for me. And look, I kind of
just find these to be a lot of binary, you're either with us or you're against us. Really, Josh? Like, that's where we're going with this? I mean, I think the problem is that, yes, judge it by its fruits. I agree. And I think what we're seeing is that that's poisoned apples here, guys. We're watching them censor people. We're watching them suppress content. We're watching them work with Israeli Unit 8200 companies that are harvesting your personal data and biometrics. And it's plainly evident. That fruit doesn't sound too good to me.
Gave up. Here I've been talking about motives and what motivates people. The truth is it's pretty hard to know. I don't even understand my own motives a lot of the time. I act on instinct.
Action matters. Action matters. My grandfather used to tell my dad, I don't want to hear talk, I want to see action.
Well, and if I'm trying to judge someone, I judge him by his actions. Stop telling me you're a great person. Show me whom you've helped. Like, it's kind of that simple for me. And I think Elon has done an extraordinary thing by opening up X to, greater speech, freer speech. I mean, it's just extraordinary.
Greater speech. Oh, what happened to free speech? It's almost free speech. It's great speech. Well, I mean, everybody seems to be screaming it's saving free speech. Well, if it's just a little bit better, it's a little bit more speech, greater speech. Okay, I think that's crazy, but we'll leave it there. So let's go to the other clip, which I made this clip a while back, and I wanted to break this down again, and keeping in mind the censored man point about the Israeli overlap, which, by the way, I find really interesting that people highlighting the Great Reset problem in many ways are supporting, or at least not going after, the problem with Israel right now. And Israel is a central part to this discussion, both globalization and the idea of the Great Reset, or even just specifically the mRNA injection COVID-19 conversation. So it's very concerning to me, as they're the ones basically censoring or stopping you from joining or using bots to manipulate, which I'm not sure how that will play out. I had a thought about how the bots were just adding up in your DM. Maybe that's going to be used to suggest that you're not. I don't know. Very strange to me. But let's play the clip. All right. So is Elon Musk the greatest threat to the NWO, or is he the NWO?
Let's also be clear. The future is not just happening. The future is built by us.
The whole idea that humans have, they have this soul or spirit and they have free will and nobody knows what's happening inside me. So whatever I choose, whether in the election or whether in the supermarket, this is my free will, that's over. Today, we have the technology to hack human beings on a massive scale. Yeah, I mean, everything is being digitalized. Everything is being monitored. In this time of crisis, you have to follow science.
Decarbonization of the economy.
Where are they traveling? How are they traveling? What are they eating? What are they consuming on the platform? So, individual carbon footprint tracker. Stay tuned. We don't have it operational yet, but this is something that we're working on.
I mean, my top recommendation, honestly, would be just to have a carbon tax.
It's often said that you should never allow a good crisis to go to waste, because a crisis is an opportunity to also do good reforms that in normal times people will never agree to. But in a crisis, you see, we have no chance. So let's do it. Surveillance. People could look back in 100 years and identify the coronavirus epidemic as the moment when a new regime of surveillance took over, especially surveillance under the skin, which I think is maybe the most important development of the 21st century, is this ability to hack human beings, to go under the skin, collect biometric data, analyze it, and understand people better than they understand themselves. This, I believe, is maybe the most important event of the 21st century. By hacking organisms, elites may gain the power to re-engineer the future of life itself. Because once you can hack something, you can usually also engineer it.
Natural selection is replaced by intelligent design. The era of inorganic life is now beginning.
In the coming decades, AI and biotechnology will give us godlike abilities to re-engineer life and even to create completely new life forms. We are about to enter a new era of inorganic life shaped by intelligent design. Our intelligent design.
Nobody will be safe if not everybody is vaccinated.
Are you vaccinated, if I
Yes.
may ask?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very pro-vaccination. I believe the science is unequivocal.
The difference of this fourth industrial revolution is it doesn't change what you are doing. It changes you. If you take genetic editing, just as an example, it's you who are changed. And of course, this has a big impact on your identity.
Can you imagine that in 10 years when we are sitting here, we have an implant in our brains, and I can immediately feel, because you all will have implants, and we measure your brain waves, and I can immediately tell you how the people react, or I can feel how the people react to your answers. Is it imaginable? Just think of sensors planted into our brains.
Basically implanted in your skull. So, but it would be flush with your skull. So you basically take out a chunk of skull, put the Neuralink device in there. You put the electrode, you'd insert the electrode threads very carefully into the brain.
To build basically an interface to the brain.
Yeah. Electrode to neuron interface at a micro level.
Okay, what is it? Like, I'm gonna have like a plug in my head that's gonna fit into a hard drive? Like, or how does that work?
Yeah. A chip and a bunch of tiny wires.
This would be implanted surgically. And it would do what? Could you download Jim?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
What?
The long-term aspiration for Neuralink would be to achieve a symbiosis with artificial intelligence.
What we have seen so far, it's corporations and governments collecting data about where we go, who we meet, what movies we watch. The next phase is the surveillance going under our skin. COVID is critical because this is what convinces people to accept, to legitimize total biometric surveillance.
One of the things that I think is so essential to free and open societies is freedom of thought. And up until now, the conversation we've been having is around freedom of speech. Once we can access people's thoughts and access people's emotions, we have to create a space that enables people to think freely.
What the fourth industrial revolution will lead to is a fusion of our physical, our digital, and our biological identities.
It is important to use the COVID-19 crisis as a timely opportunity. So people assume we are just going back to the good old world which we had, and everything will be normal again in how we are used to normal, in the old fashion. This is, let's say, fiction. It will not happen. The cut which we have now is much too strong in order not to leave traces. Also be clear, the future is not just happening. The future is built by us.
Now, there's a lot in there that is, about specifically Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum. The point overall is to recognize that whether it's aware or not, the billionaire military contractor working on every aspect of what's being driven into the Great Reset should be a problem, or the artificial intelligence aspect. All these conversations about the fighting against this next step, well, playing a central role in all of them. Even worse, a very surreptitious aspect of it where you're basically going, oh, but it's the good version, right? It's the good. So it's the same thing, but he's the right person behind it. And you know what? I hope that you're right, but I don't believe that's what's happening. And a lot of people are falling for it. So here on Decensored News highlights this combination of the two things we just discussed, the spam bot aspect and also on Twitter in general. He says, get a load of this. X is marking all three of these replies, and you guys might have seen this recently start happening, as probable spam. Oh, and don't forget, as Censored Man highlighted, he was really beginning to catch all of these bot programs that were kind of liking each other's content. And like, by the way, same with that troll that's constantly going after our content. I noticed the same thing. The first thing they do is like all the other posts and share these different things. And he was able to find it by that. And then guess what? The moment they hid your likes on this platform, suddenly wasn't able to see it anymore. That seems like a very deliberate action to hide the Israeli bots we're talking about. But it says X is marking all these as spam, probable spam, and burying them behind a show probable spam link. None of them are spam. Guess what? All of them are critical of Elon Musk and Alex Jones. I find that to be pretty interesting. And here he is highlighting this actual discussion. And he's just saying, I'm reaching 10 to 50 million people a day on X, not being censored. And Decensored News says, remember this as you continue to see countless independent voices suspended, shadow banned, etc. Pay attention to who is given the freedom of reach and who isn't, and who whitewashes that censorship. I agree with that. Now here is an interesting overlap point, but this was kind of last second. I wanted to throw this in there because It's a partisan thing I see here. And one of the main things I'm seeing is this very alarming kind of partisan. They're really trying to drive you back into that division partisan mindset. I think at a time when more people than ever are seeing through the two-party illusion. Oops. And so this is about a platform that I've pointed out in the past that I think is just horrible. It's constantly and intentionally misframing information. And really, this is the worst kind of talking about things that I ultimately argue are as a real agenda. Something like basically the destruction of the agricultural systems or the farmers or the, just by destroying our food infrastructure. I think that's obvious. Whether most specifically while it was happening, the whole take it on the chin because of Putin's doing that to our food kind of thing, which it was quite obvious that wasn't the case. A lot of people kind of just took that and went forward. But my point is, this is an article that was recently put out. And by the way, Camus shared this. Now, just to be clear, I like a lot of what Camus puts out. I think that I really do. I think a lot of his content is very thought-provoking, and I think it's important. But a lot of times he'll share these articles from this platform, and just with a screenshot, which, I thought about screenshot Twitter files and all of that. But this is an article coming from a platform that I've seen almost routinely get things flat out wrong without things that aren't even real, but then at the same time, almost deliberately or absolutely deliberately, but frame things in a dishonest way that I think hurts the truth, or I know hurts the truth. In this case, it says the World Economic Forum has called for a, quote, controlled demolition of the global food system as a part of a major reinvention of how humans consume food. Okay. It says in the title, with quotes, WEF calls for a controlled demolition. Okay. So not just that they're quoting it, which is also a problem, as you all know, just being accurate. If you're quoting it, then that better be a quote that's in the article. But you're claiming that the WEF said their WEF is calling for a controlled demolition. Now, again, I'm very clear. I believe the agenda around the destruction of the food system is very real. And I've obviously been covering this for months, if not over a year now, right? You guys all well know this. So I just wanted him to know this because I respect his work. And I said, that's a terrible website that's routinely presents topics in a deliberately dishonest light. Sites like that hurt the truth. The words controlled demolition are not quoted from anything. I agree this agenda is real, but this article helps that agenda for many reasons, especially with fake quotes. One, because you are framing things that aren't actually the reality in a way that make people read that who care about being factual and go, well, that's not what it says. Like, so just like me, I'm going to go, well, okay. Well, at the very least, they're being fast and loose. Excuse me. Playing it fast and loose with what was actually said in order to be more of a clickbait title. Why would anybody trust something like that? That's very problematic. And so this person, I just think is funny. They're tagging, a lot of people in this chat down there are like, it's totally real. And I'm like, did you miss that I just said it was real? Or the point that they think that I'm like that this is not, who cares, right? It's clearly happening. That is what I'm most concerned about. We all should care more than ever, especially now when it's a time when people are being very subtly misled. And so I just called him out saying I did agree, but guess who responded? The guy who owns this platform, which is the People's Voice. And he says, you're obsessed. I said, okay. I said, with facts, I agree. Odd that anybody honest wouldn't be. And I said, well, I have you. Would you mind pointing out for us where they're quoted as saying controlled demolition? Would be good for me to clear up my apparent misunderstanding, which I don't think funny enough, no, not on this one. There's a response on this one, but it's one of these where I'm not allowed to see it, I guess, which is, I don't know what that means. But this is the point. So I simply said that, and he responded here saying, quote, I don't know what the quote is for. Everything is factually accurate, but I don't always pretending he's quoting me, I guess. Everything is factually accurate, which I also disagree with, by the way. There's things in there that are subjective, that are his opinions. But it says, but I don't like a word they used in their headline, even though it accurately represents the facts. It's a word that they didn't use that you quoted them as saying. How is it possible that people can play it down that that's not important? And I simply said, you're embarrassing yourself. I stated clearly that it's a real agenda. You're part of the problem. If we can't recognize that misleading people into thinking, which most of them share the screenshot, that the World Economic Forum is saying we're calling for a controlled demolition of the food supply. When you read the article, you can take what they're saying as that, and I agree that's likely a larger part of what's happening, but that's not what they're actually saying. You can glean what they're actually saying through those words and argue that's what it's amounting to. And if you're okay with that, then you're part of the problem. We need to be accurate now more than ever. And the problem is people like this are being shared, this platform in particular, by a lot of the InfoWars circle, the Tucker circle. It's a problem, and I see that as part of this game. So all I want to highlight to you is that there are websites just like this that are deliberately, in my opinion, misleading people, even in very small ways. And all that does is hurt the truth. Why wouldn't you just cite it as they're calling for a reinvention of the food system? And let me explain for you why that's a problem. Or, you know, why? Because that's not as catchy. That's not clickbaity. And all his response is you're obsessed. You don't like that you are deliberately lying about that, even if it's a small point, and you come after me for pointing out that you're wrong. That's because people are dishonest. I just think that's interesting. Now, again, if you missed the point, and there's 1,000 comments below it that are asking like I'm pretending that's not a real agenda, that I definitely think that's a real problem, that they are, in fact, in many ways doing that, but not because they stated they're going to control demolition of the food supply, then the problem is you're falling into the gap of where, well, it aligns with what I think, so let's just ignore the fact that it's not completely accurate. That's part of that problem. Right? That they're aiming at people like that are willing to ignore that it's not exactly correct, but it is at least showing people. That's called lying for your truth. And sometimes the truth is not even actually the truth. But the point is that's what they think, so they put it out, and people then say that. Then you get people out there going, didn't you hear the World Economic Forum just called for controlled demolition? And they're wrong. And they're made to look stupid when they think that they're trying. You all get it. I genuinely think, a small example, but a very big problem. And we've been highlighting the lying for your truth situation for quite a while now. I think all of this connects to the bigger issue. Now, on a small point in the same direction, the reason a lot of this happens, Sal the Agorist shared this, and this is actually mind-blowing to me. This is a real book. It's entitled Christ Trump. One word, Christ Trump. Persecution of a man. The point is that people lionize these people. Like, some people genuinely argue that Trump was sent by God. And then how do you... That's a whole Zionist Israel kind of perspective, right? How do you argue with someone like that? Oh, God said I'm supposed to do this. Well, okay, you're wrong. Like, you can't. There's no argument there. And the point is, people who believe that will act in very dangerous ways under the guise that you're actually now fighting God's will. Very concerning to me, guys. And this is how this continues to work. Now, on the point of Elon, back to the Twitter side, I think this is interesting, as we just highlighted a second ago. 1984 just highlights the main point about them going to work with these companies. He says, it turns out Elon's trip to Israel wasn't just for kosher theater and for IDF propaganda tour. Secret meeting took place while he was there that went virtually unreported by any news outlet. In attendance was Netanyahu, Musk's tour guide, investor Omri Kaspi, Brigadier General Danny Gold, head of the Israeli Directorate of Defense and Research and Development, and one of the developers of Iron Dome, Alf Venture Capital Funds, and partner Michael Eisenberg, and Israeli cybersecurity firm Check CEO, which is now working to apparently remove all the bots, even though by day it gets worse. For some of us anyway, who was also an ex, in big quotes, intelligence unit 8200. It's hard to miss these complete overlaps. And these are, again, so let's just say they're on one side of this actually calling out Israel, which I don't really see. They're completely praising and saying X is the future, and this is what's happening. You either have a blind spot to that, or you're lying in other ways. I'm not sure how that would work out for somebody. This is clearly happening. And it says that the six men talked about technology in the service of Israel's defense, dealing with fake content and anti-Semitic and anti-Israel comments, and the use by non-democratic countries of bots as part of campaigns to change perception, including the X platform. I guess only if it's not Israeli. Now, this is important. This gets into getting further into the Israel conversation here. This is actually mind-blowing to me. Not that I'm surprised it happened, but that this is being publicly admitted. It just shows you how things are shifting. As Tally writes, turns out that in March, mid-genocide, 14 U.S. judges went to Israel, which in and of itself seems crazy to me, to meet with the IDF, lawyers, and government officials for the expressed and recorded intention, the purpose of influencing their opinions, knowing that there's an ongoing genocide. So in the middle of the genocide, now people individually going to Israel, whatever, it's but as 14 of the judges in some kind of organized tour while they're committing a genocide, while courts are ruling against There are people that are filing lawsuits against Biden as a war criminal in the United States. And they go over to Israel, and guess what they were doing? Oh, actually, shoot, I just realized. Oh, look at that. Instagram censored our show again. That was quick that time. I forgot where. Oh, I think it started. Oh, that's right. She had it lined up right at the right spot. So let's see where it was. It was 25:19.
Good morning, everyone.
You'll be pretty surprised.
Bahar? Another question. You requested that one of the judges assigned to the case, Judge Nelson, recuse himself, and he did. Why did you do that, and do you think it made a difference?
Yeah, we learned that Judge Nelson, Ryan Nelson, was one of 14 United States judges, including 3 judges on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals who were taken on a sponsored visit to Israel to meet.
Now, when this is taken on a sponsor, I mean, I don't know how that doesn't mean being paid or somebody funding something in your name or something like that. So that's also very concerning.
With the IDF forces and lawyers and government officials for the avowed purpose of trying to influence U.S. judicial opinion. He went on that trip, and interestingly, the trip occurred in not October 8th or 9th, in March, during peak genocide. And after this case had been docketed in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, this organization sent 3 judges who might be called upon for the avowed purpose of influencing their opinion. We learned that Judge Nelson was one of the judges on that trip and invoked the ethics requirements and the law regarding the appearance of partiality and put all of the evidence before the court and Judge Nelson. And we appreciate that he made the ethical decision in this case because it's hard to imagine how anyone would not question his potential bias in a case like this when he had been exposed to the specific arguments that have been and legal questions around Israel's propagation of a genocide.
That's just wild, man. And so, I mean, I argue he recused himself probably under pressure, right? Because clearly they're willing to speak on that right now. And they were probably the ones, I mean, look, 2 of them are wearing Palestinian, garb. So it's very clear that they support Palestine. But it's just wild to me that by the way, so it's clear about objectivity here. It would be the same difference if they went to Palestine, right? Like the point is you're a judge ruling on this case and you go to one of the sides, right? Well, I shouldn't say ruling on this case or potentially, right? But either way, the point is now that they are, I think there might've been a level of understanding that was coming to pass and then being influenced by one of the sides. I mean, that's just obviously a problem, right? But the real point is not that they did this, but that there's an Israeli entity going as far as to pay for people to come over there to expressly influence what they will rule on. This is our problem we're all highlighting about AIPAC and the rest of these overlaps that are not even doing what they frame themselves as doing. Like they're not just lobbying groups if what they're doing is in real time influencing coercively, punitively, people using money to do what they want in real time on policy votes, on statements made publicly, as the clip now going around from Massey about their AIPAC person, right? Which is important. Very alarming to me that that's something that people aren't highlighting. Now, before we get into some other points, I just wanted to make sure we saw this because it's just really, it is pretty crazy to me. And I would argue that it seems to be at least indicative of the current government's perception that we may have a need for this at some point, and that may have to do with Israel, but you guys can decide for yourselves. Michael Tracy simply highlights, and this is very easy to look up. It's been around, and this is as of the recent NDAA. He says, for the first time since 1972, with the new NDAA bill passed, which there's always so many surreptitious and concerning things within these things. That's where the Smith Modernization Act and all these different things about locking up American citizens indefinitely during Obama. All these things came through the NDAA. But it says by the House would automatically register all males 18 to 26 for selective service in the military. For the past 52 years, you were just required to sign up on your own. So you could argue it's a small difference. But quite frankly, I don't think I ever did that. And technically it's a crime. But my point is, I think that we're at a point now where it's just no longer your choice to sign up anyway, even though they argue it was legally you had to. The point is now that this is just kind of, obligatory. And now if they needed to, they could call on those people. And now suddenly you're, draft scenario. It's a small change, but it's worrisome. It really is, especially since that's a change from allowing you to do it to now making it happen without your consent. Now into Israel, on the mindset of whether that might is indicative of some kind of building necessity for more people in the military. And again, that was the argument that he's making, is that at a time when they've never had less support for people joining the military. Rami Abdul from the Euromed Human Rights Group highlights in general what's been going on over the past 8 months. Plus, Israel has killed more than 45,000 Palestinians from Gaza and injured another 90,000. Additionally, more than 3,500 people have been forcibly disappeared. This means Israel has killed, injured, or kidnapped approximately 8% of the Gaza population. 85% of Gaza's residents are now displaced, with over 75% of their homes and infrastructure destroyed. 75%. There's just no way we play this pinpoint targeting game anymore. Israel has proven to be the most brutal, bloody, and arrogant force in history. 100% agree. Kenneth Roth highlights at least 10% of the ordnance that Israel's firing into Gaza fails to explode. Often hidden amid debris, this unexploded ordnance, quote, even under ideal conditions, would take 14 years to clear out, according to a UN expert. So think about, I would actually be interested to find out whether these ordinances are being carefully not used in some of the areas they maybe have designs for building settlements on. That would be very telling, wouldn't it? Either way, the point is that we're pretending that they're all going to be remember the game was there. Remember, I mean, that's actually a good point to bring up right now. I wish I would have pulled this up, but I'm not going to try to search for it. Remember when Netanyahu swore that they'd be allowed to go back to their homes? Did anybody believe that? Right at the beginning, his big statement was, don't worry, you'll be able to go right back to your home. Remember that? And we said, no, and you're a racist, blood libel, how dare you? Here we are. Shocking, right? We're all shocked. It's exactly what we knew was going to happen. The point is, how about their houses are just demolished, flattened, stolen from? But also, it's littered with munitions everywhere, as well as the cans that they put out that look like tuna that explode when you open them. All these friendly things they do for stopping Hamas and only going after Hamas and not civilians who are the ones picking those up. Alan Mizrahi makes an excellent point here to go into the next segment to understand that this is not unique. This is what's always happened. The brutality, the suffering, because of the Zionist organization. And on top of all of it, they've failed every single time. Caused a lot of suffering, untold amounts of suffering, murder, rape, pillaging, destruction, but they failed in every single time they've attempted this. And yet it still keeps happening. Hopefully not after this. Hopefully this changes. But here's what this point's important to understand. And your government has allowed this to continue. He says, let's make it even more interesting. If you really, really, really need to find it in anything critical, he's talking about hate, I believe, because he's been basically getting attacked for hating on Israel as an Israeli Jew himself, for highlighting that they failed and lost this war already. The point is that Haaretz has written multiple articles already. A brigadier general himself is quoted as saying in this article, we have already lost. We cannot win this war. But it's hate when he does it, right? He simply says, if you need to find it in anything critical, and if that's your world and your range of emotions, you'll find hate in my previous posts. That's becoming a little viral, the one I was talking about. Israel isn't surviving this. If that's not what you're looking for and not what you're about, you won't find a grain of hate in what I said or generally say. My hate, he says, is always directed at specific powerful figures and ideologies, not large groups of people. He says, but there's a different context altogether to my dire prediction for Israel, and one which is not commonly spoken of. I'm going to state it simply. He says, Israel never accomplished what it set out to achieve in any of its wars. It always, and without exceptions, failed. In 1948, the nestling Zionist state set out to completely eradicate from geography, culture, and memory every remnant of the existence of Palestine. And by the way, a lot of which we'll go over in the next segment will verify pretty much everything he says in here. It failed, he says. The seeds for Palestinian resistance were planted. Palestine became an internationally recognized ambition, and both Palestinian refugees and 1948 Palestinians never forgot their identity. That's failure. 1956, Israel set out to take over Egypt and the Suez Canal and Gaza in a conspiracy with France and Britain. It failed. The Egyptians became sworn haters of Israel, at least the people did, not the government, who's now co-opted by Israel. In 1960s, or at least, and yes, it generally still is, but the point is we saw a lot change with this current situation, but the regime change took place, very clearly placed them in the normalization side of Israel. 1967, Israel tried to expand its borders, imagining Palestinians no longer exist and will not become a problem. So it took Gaza from Egypt, the West Bank, East Jerusalem from Jordan, and the Golan Heights from Syria, which remember Trump illegally handed to them, even though they already had it. It failed. No one recognizes Israel's claim to sovereignty over any of these territories, despite 50 years of American dominance and relentless one-sidedness on Israel's behalf. Israel is more stuck than ever with the Palestinian issue, and the age of American global dominance is coming to a close. That's a major failure. I also argue a major sign of the fact that that people are inherently good. That's maybe not a popular opinion with most people, but I think it's clear that the reason this didn't succeed is because most people don't want to think that that's what's happening. That's why your governments pretend to be good. Most of us want good. It's important to think about. 1973, Israel attempted to show it could dismiss Arab demands for recognition and peace effortlessly. It failed and lost almost an entire generation of young Israeli men. It was forced to make peace with Egypt, and after that, and promised Palestinian autonomy. That's a failure. In 1982, Israel tried to take over Lebanon, which seems like they're trying to push now out of desperation to distract from everything else, which will be another failure. It says try to take over Lebanon, create a puppet government, and destroy the Palestinian resistance, and failed. It lost a bloody war, was driven out of Lebanon by force. The PLO survived, and Israel ushered in the era of Hezbollah, Israel's fiercest and most capable enemy, right on its border. That's a failure. 2006, Israel tried to destroy Hezbollah. It failed. And the organization today is 100 times stronger than it was 20 years ago, when it had not a single drone and but a precious few heavy, precise rockets and missiles. Now it has tens of thousands of both, plus the world's most deadly anti-ship cruise missiles. That's a failure. In repeated campaigns in the Gaza Strip, Israel attempted to destroy Hamas. It failed. Israel has been trying to destroy, sabotage, and obstruct Iran's military capabilities for 40 years. Now it has hypersonic missiles, one of the world's largest and most sophisticated drone fleets, and an entire network of trained and equipped proxies. I disagree with that. And it's on the brink of creating an atomic weapon. That's failure. My point is, that may just be easy language based on the narratives, but I think it's easily provable that these are not proxies of Iran. They're simply allies of Iran, like many overlapping alliances in the world today. Whether it's Hezbollah, Ansarallah, or Hamas, whatever they're trying to claim, I think they're simply aligned in the interests of fighting against the Zionist state and for their own independence. But you can decide for yourself. It says, so what's going to be different this time around? When the U.S. is sinking, Israel's international support is dwindling rapidly, the global south is rising, the IDF is battered from 8 months of loss, injury, and attrition, and last but not least, when Israel is led by the dumbest, most deluded and impotent figures in all of its admittedly short history. He says, will this war of wars, managed so poorly, with this little international support, with crumbling societal cohesion inside Israel, which is a huge part of this, can finally and miraculously achieve everything all of Israel's precious ward failed to do, namely erase the name of Palestine from existence? Can Israel go back to normalcy from the depths of depravity to which it let itself succumb? Will it be able to recover from losing 50,000 young men? And that's a conservative estimation in case of all-out war with Hezbollah, not to mention Hezbollah plus Iran. What will it do with Palestine after that? Will it be able to keep oppressing it? People who will want to see this as the hate will find just that. People with any sense of history, psychology, and a bit of military understanding, or simple pragmatic thinking will understand that Israel's historic and current leadership has put it in a position from which even a miracle won't be able to save it. So now he's not saying that's what he wants. He's saying that is the static and obvious reality of what their hatred, bigotry, and racism has put them into. It was never thinking strategically. It was never thinking about tomorrow. And tomorrow is so right around the corner. He says, soon we're going to find out that for all of the braggadocio, their bravado, their hubris, very little, as always, has been prepared in the way of real answers. I think that's a very well, I'm pretty sure I shared that, a pretty well put together statement. Now, keeping that in mind, we're going to start with a clip from, actually, I forgot I wanted to look up who this was. This guy you recognize, he's been, I think he's kind of a content creator, been very pro-Palestine. I've seen him do a lot of interviews. I wanted to look him up and I forgot, but if somebody knows who he is, please shout it out in the chat. This is somebody commenting, not this person here. This is Nabil Rajab posting this video underneath AIPAC, who simply stupidly says on the 14th, who is, by the way, like, this is a lobbying group. Why are they making these statements? Because they're acting in the interest of a foreign government. It's pretty clear. Hamas runs the Gaza Health Ministry. They say, when you quote them, you're quoting Hamas. Not to say that it's brothers going, just make sure you know that. All they're trying to do is scare you away from citing what everybody's already acknowledged is completely accurate, including the Israeli intelligence apparatus, including the Israeli army, both of which called it reliable and accurate, respectively. Easy to look up. I mean, I can even grab one of them probably right now. Right there. Israeli intelligence has deemed the Hamas-run health ministry death toll figures generally accurate. Okay, so they can still be lying. They can still be wrong. The point is, now if you're claiming that, then that means you're calling the Israeli intelligence apparatus a liar, that they're deceiving you, which probably isn't that far from the truth. But the point is, they've admitted that it's accurate. The UN has admitted that historically they always end up being generally accurate. I mean, it's incredible. Even the US government's made that point. And yet here they are. Don't look at it because we just want you to ignore all the data that makes us look bad. Pretty clear. But here is what Avi Shalom said. And you've seen me play his discussions many times. He is a very highly respected British-Israeli historian. And he's asked point blank, who started this?
I am with Professor Avi Shalom. He is an Israeli-British historian. And I have one question for you. Who is the one to blame for what is going on in Gaza right now? Israel or Hamas?
Israel is basically to blame for the war in Gaza. Hamas attacked Israel on the 7th of October, and this started the cycle of violence. But the Hamas attack did not happen in a vacuum. It happened in a context, and the context was 56 years of suffocating Israeli occupation of Gaza and of the West Bank. So the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories is the basic problem for this conflict. Hamas was being sidelined. Israel was signing peace accords with the Arab countries, the so-called Abraham Accords. And Israel completely ignored Hamas and exploited the Palestinian Authority on the West Bank as a subcontractor for Israeli society. Hamas is the only Palestinian group that stands for resistance to the Israeli occupation. And by launching the attack on Israel on the 7th of October, Hamas sent a powerful message that the Palestinians will not be sidelined, that the Palestinian resistance is not dead, that although the Palestinian Authority collaborates with Israel in the West Bank, Hamas will continue to lead the struggle for Palestinian freedom and independence.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Now, what I find very interesting about that is, of course, everybody out there in the partisan world, the binary game, it's this or that, it's left or right, are going to say, here he is supporting Hamas. Is that what he said? No, not even remotely. I believe to bet you if you asked for more nuance, he'd probably make all sorts of comments about how Hamas isn't this or that. But his point is not rooted in support. It's just basic facts, which are that they're a group fighting for resistance, which is pretty clear. It doesn't mean they're all doing the right things and not breaking the law. But on top of that, the real point is that, yes, as I've said from the beginning, and Francesca Albanese and plenty of UN entities or international lawyers or people that are understanding of international law, that what they did, as much as uncomfortable for people that don't want to hear it, was a protected act of armed resistance. It doesn't mean they didn't commit crimes. by the logic that because of what some of them did inside, if that is what you believe, and there's plenty of reason to doubt that based on Hannibal Directive and IDF involvement, but again, they definitely committed some crimes that I can prove. If your argument is based on those actions that it invalidates the move, then every war ever fought is invalidated. And maybe we should make that argument, but it has to be balanced, because what's happening is you're pretending these are wars that are just, while you can prove the U.S., Iraq, I always make that example, raped and pillaged and all sorts of horrifying things that are now verified. So based on that logic, that's an illegal war, which I think it is for other reasons. But the point is that this was a legal act of armed resistance. It's easy, a Fort Geneva Convention, international law. It's not hard to see. And so his point is simple, that this is, and again, with the PO working with Israel, that's important, or PA, that's Palestinian Authority. Robert's been covering that for a long time. He's simply saying that they are acting in the interest of, the act they carried out was in the interest of Palestinian resistance. I think it's important because that statement, it comes from an objective perspective, as an Israeli, as somebody who has been historically fighting for human rights. Now here is from Torah Judaism, an example just highlighting what Avi Shalom has always highlighted, that this, before the Zionist organization gave itself territorial dimensions on Palestine, people lived there in harmony. This is the class, and I think there's a rising, not that there wasn't, there are problems anywhere. There's always going to be strife and problem and fighting. But overall, it was not this nobody there, a land without a people. It's not the reality. But it's also important to realize today that there is a growing, and I'll actually end, I think, today with a video, a growing number of Jews standing up and highlighting this very important problem of Zionism, of the Israeli state and what they're doing, and the illegitimacy with which they act. And it is important because it is growing. And I guarantee it makes them very uncomfortable because it highlights the problem. And if you are not protected by the illusion that you're attacking Judaism when you highlight their crimes, then suddenly they're unprotected. And I hope we're all seeing that. And here is a very prominent Jewish organization, or Torah Judaism, who is big groups in Israel, big groups in London and the United States. They're all over the place. And by the way, they get beat up by the IDF all the time. Here's what he wants you to understand about this situation.
Is of this Zionist government and the place of this head of the Zionist Air Force, which conducted this war crime by bombarding so many millions of innocent people. They're supposed to be shipped into Hague in Netherlands. There is a court, international court for justice for war criminals. That's their place. They should be judged and jailed and receive their punishments, which they deserve. It's very important to put them in jail, these war criminals, in order to show that there is justice. Palestinian groups, leaders, military groups saying, we have nothing against Jews. We tolerate Jews. We lived with Jews thousands of years together. The 300,000 people left Spain. Where did they live to? China? Japan? Australia? No. They left to Turkey. They left to Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco, Albania in the Second World War. It was a small Muslim country. And they had a few thousand Jews there. Nazis Germany has occupied Albania. But not single Jew was killed in Albania. You know where the Muslims were hiding the Jews? They were hiding them in mosques, in basements, in all types of places. And they saved all these 5,000 Jews in Albania. We're going to live together as the same as it was everywhere, as the same as Jews lived in Turkey, Algeria, Morocco, in Iran till now, peacefully, in harmony, without any problems, inshallah.
Right. God, I think it means, God willing, right? I think the point is what he's saying is challenging the general framing of Zionists. He says Muslims and Jews are not enemies. Palestinians are not enemies of Jews. Palestinian resistance groups are not anti-Semitic. They have no problem with Jews and Judaism. And according to their 2017 charter, very stated, it's about Zionism. Their problem is with the occupying Zionist regime. Resistance groups are fighting for their homes and lands usurped by the Zionist invaders. During World War II, Muslims hid Jews as mosques and protect them, as he just highlighted. Right? And on that point, in case you're curious about it, right? Yes, their original charter did say, did focus on Jews. 2017, they changed it and made it clear we're fighting the Zionist entity. It's not about Jews or their religion. Now, you can argue that's a lie. It's a fair question, right? It's certainly something you should consider. But again, here's what, oh my gosh, Noam Chomsky, blanked on his name. Here's what he had to say about that. Since I have it here, I figured I'd play it. It's an important clip.
But now let's look at the Hamas Charter. The Hamas Charter was written by maybe half a dozen people in 1988 at a moment of an extreme Israeli attack on Gaza. It has no status. They've repeated over and over again that it doesn't apply anymore. And if you're interested in charters, why keep to that? Take the governing party in Israel, Likud. It grew out of Cherut. That's its ideological center, Begin's Cherut, Netanyahu's Cherut. Its position, never changed, is that the land of Israel, that the entire land of Israel belongs to the Jews. That includes today's Jordan, okay? In fact, the old slogan was both sides of the Jordan. That's ours and this is too. They've never changed that. So that's their charter. Did anybody pay attention to it? Of course not. Then came the January election and Israel intensified its attack with US support. After that, there are repeated attacks, Israeli attacks and ceasefires agreements. Every ceasefire agreement is approximately like what I read. What happens is Israel completely dismisses and disregards it, maintains the siege in violation of the ceasefire, increases the violence. Hamas lives up to it, and Israel officially accepts that agrees to that, until some escalation of Israeli violence leads to a Hamas reaction, and then another episode of mowing the lawn. That's been going on since November 2005. Hamas is not a nice organization. They do a lot of rotten things. That's for the Palestinians to worry about. But it has nothing to do with us. If we were supporting Hamas, nothing, zero. If we were supporting Hamas, it would be our problem. But we're not. And what they do is for Palestinians to deal with. What we deal with is what we are doing, which is supporting massive criminal operations all over the region, blocking peace. That's for us to be concerned about.
Right, and like his point, that Hamas is doing bad things. Well, okay, so does it logically make sense for you then just to do the bad things too because they started it? Doesn't that make you just as bad? Like, we're not in kindergarten here, guys. The idea of this presented mentality that we're the better, we're setting the tone, we're the good guys fighting for freedom. You don't just say those things and then come out and do the bad. Because that's what we're all becoming very shockingly aware of right now. That it's all a bunch of narrative, right? His point there is that you're supporting the most belligerently violent entity in the area just because you're going, they're bad right there. And maybe they are. But that doesn't change the fact that the U.S. government is supporting the exact opposite of what they claim that they are. And so remember the ceasefire point as we get to that, because that's also relevant to the game they're playing with the ceasefires right now. But here's something else to start with on this segment. Keeping all the other stuff in mind we just covered, Levi Klampus says, do not for one moment forget how this war started. And I guess weirdly shows this clip of the Hamas members taking what this, the famously misrepresented image of this woman being taken. That's where it started? Like, that's not even accurate based on their narrative, right? But what's crazy. And I simply highlighted this, and I'll show you this next clip. And I said, don't worry, we won't. Nakba and Nakba 2024. Here is an article from United Nations from May 17th. Nakba of 1948 and today are not separate events, but ongoing process of Palestinian displacement, replacement, speakers tell panel urging immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Now, here's what's important. Of course, question everything, including and especially groups like the United Nations. But what I'm always pointing out, the United Nations is not some static entity, right? There's definitely the body there, which is like overlapping with the WHO and like that. We should be concerned about everything, the globalization conversation. But we're talking about things like the Security Council or even specifically the General Assembly. My point's always that these are just entities representing different countries that have their own separate opinions, and I don't trust any of them. But it's interesting how that can effectively drive things based on opportunism and, vying agendas, but ultimately doesn't allow one group. It shouldn't, but the vetoes changed all that, but steamrolling over everybody. My point in this is a panel, a conversation, and people involved are testifying and they're putting, the bottom line is, this is not just Hamas UN saying what bad for Israel, which is this dumb, simplistic framing. Be skeptical of the United Nations, like everything else, and Israel for that matter. Same people that are saying we shouldn't trust the UN are blindly supporting whatever Israel says with no evidence. The point is that this is obviously valid. And just because they say UN Hamas, that people just choose to disregard it. People make the statement, haven't you learned by now the UN is not trustworthy? It's like, No source is trustworthy. We should be questioning everything and take all the source material and look at it equally, including from the UN or from Israel or from anybody. Problem is, Israel's been caught lying about damn near everything they're doing. The UN has been guilty of a lot of manipulations over the years as the body, as individuals within it, different countries that are speaking on behalf of it. In this case, it's not hard to recognize that this is easily, objectively the truth. The Nakba of 1948 is not disputed. It's obvious. The reality is that it's never stopped. So if you're going to acknowledge that 48 happened, which it clearly did, or 56, or 2006, or any number of other very clear massacres against Palestinians, then we don't pretend that October 7th started this. It's an embarrassing statement that is clearly slanted towards hiding everything that they've done. Here's Avi Shalom again in the clip that I played before, just to overlap with the one we just played, making the same statement here that this didn't start then.
Zionism is racism. Israel cannot be both. Israel is either a racist Jewish state or it's a democratic state for everybody. And that's what I would like Israel to be. I'd like a democratic solution, one state with equal rights for all its inhabitants. Your organization, Human Rights Watch, issued a report last year about Israel, and the conclusion was it is an apartheid state. And there are 4 major human rights groups in the last 2 years who issued similar reports, reached the same conclusion. Israel is an apartheid state. So apartheid is racism. Apartheid is discrimination. But Israel is the only member of the United Nations that I know which is officially racist. And I say this because of the July 2018 nation-state law, which says the Jews have a unique right to self-determination in Israel. Unique means exclusive. Yes. It means Arabs have no right to self-determination. It means even if Arabs became a majority, they would still have no right to self-determination. So most certainly Zionism is a racist ideology, and it is largely responsible for the Nakba that has unfolded throughout the last century and continues today.
And continues today. But people like this are desperate to get you to think the lie. It's all very clear. Here's Abby Martin showing you this didn't start on October 7th, right? The reality, and this is a sensitive topic, but it's important to understand. And it's also important to understand that it's not the entirety, as we can show you groups that are speaking out and protesting against Zionism. And that's largely the ones that are highlighting that Palestinians have a right to exist. You can decide for for yourself what the percentages are. It's obvious the majority, because of the decade, just being socially engineered and propagandized from birth through their propagandized schooling system, a lot like Americans, to think these people are all terrorists, that you have to fight, all the narratives you hear. It is prevalent, but it's not everybody. It's important to understand. But Abby Martin's always been doing amazing work on this topic, and she says this video from 2017, every single Israeli she talked to advocated ethnic cleansing and genocide. It's not just Netanyahu, it's their society. But it's important. I would also point out too that, I would argue that there's, and this has been stated by people in Haaretz, and that it's obvious even to them that this is the prevalent mindset, right? And it's sort of like in our country with politics, people are afraid to speak their mind if it challenges those kind of generally held beliefs. So I argue a lot of people there wouldn't want to come out and publicly say that because they'd be attacked for being pro-Palestine, right? But just bottom line, realize that it's not everybody.
I think Israelis have to take over, and they have to kick them away. It will be much better not to kill them, just to go back to Arab countries.
But it's really rightfully ours if you look at the history and at the wars, and we didn't even start a lot of the wars. And we conquered these places rightfully, it's ours.
1,400 years later, we come back. Now, I'm not saying that we can blame the people living here for what happened, but you gotta accept that that's some kind of divine justice, that their great-great-great-great-grandfathers kicked my great-great-great-grandfather out of here, and then we come back, and all of a sudden they're like, well, no, we don't want it, it's not fair.
I think that the Jews came here, they took
they took this land and this is our land now, and I don't think there should be here no Arabs. Like Arabs, they want, we gave them Gaza, they should go live there quietly. If they want, they should go back to Iraq, I don't know, to wherever they want.
I think that we need to... איך אומרים לאיש בערבית? כן, תגידי לי את המילה הזאת.
I don't think there's any answer to it. Really? There's only one way.
For those in the podcast, she just says, kick out the Arabs. You know, the ignorance is astounding. And, you know, it's and you could argue it that it's not even if they've been engineered to think this, that they think that they're in the right. Doesn't mean that, you know, there shouldn't be some kind of moral aspect that kicks in, but, you know, it's for you to decide.
I don't think there's any answer to it.
Really?
There's only one way, like, I would carpet bomb them.
You would carpet bomb them?
It's the only way you could deal with it.
You got to love that. No, wow, there's no answer. Let's just kill them all. That's wild.
Like, or try to stop them a different way. It never worked.
I think that we're miserable. The Arabs make a פיגועים and we need to kill Arabs. No.
I think another thing
there's an important point to make right there. You know, like, think about in any society, any group standing there going, you know, and, like, you know, fill in whatever entity, black people, Chinese people, Indians, whatever. And their statement is, yeah, I think we just need to kill them all. Now giggle about it. Like, take a second and reflect on that. That's cult mentality. Like, the point is that you either have literally no understanding of what's morally correct, no moral compass whatsoever, or you've just been so propagandized to think that that's somehow within morally accepted narrative or morally accepted perceptions. But the idea, just blithely giggle about killing them all, like, that's like sociopathic mentality right there. That's absolutely crazy to me. But this is the problem. They're being taught this. You know, they constantly want to frame these children in Palestine being taught to kill all the Jews, and it's not even accurate. There's some sentiment there. Like, you can clearly point that out. But the way that they keep making this narrative, it's clear that they're simply highlighting what they're doing and projecting it onto Hamas or anybody in Palestine. It's just not the reality. And you could talk to plenty of Jews. I think it was, I don't want to misquote his name, but I think we have it later in the show. People would be like, look, I've been to Gaza. This narrative they have, like, go to Gaza, you see how you fare there. He responded, like, I've been there many times as a Jew. He's like, it's one of the best places I've ever been. It's just these narratives are just the reflexive talking points. They're really not rooted in reality.
The Jews should have rights to hate them. I think we have the right.
Arabs make a פיגועים and we need to kill Arabs. No.
I think another thing that the Jews should have rights to hate them. I think we have the right to hate them. I don't see a reason why not. I wouldn't trust any of them.
אין מצב שיהיה פה שלום בארץ, אי אפשר לעשות איתם שלום.
There's no chance for peace. You can't have peace with them. They always hate us. That's what they're taught, but the reality is clearly the reverse. I mean, there's some both ways, obviously. But I think what you need to understand, as Avi Shlam, Israeli historian, pointed out, is this stems from their occupation, displacement, which generates a lot of hatred. And there's a reason that the Israeli society, they're, controlled, censored, curated historic perception that comes from their military censoring anything that highlights what they've done in the past. Even in the eyes of these individuals in school, you hide all of the things that they've done to these people. I mean, Haaretz has made entire articles about this, how they're not allowed to highlight or even look up certain things in the archive because of I forget the name of the rule that they have. It's a law that's you're not allowed to highlight the things that demonstrate that they aren't what they say they are. It's crazy and obvious.
הם תמיד שונאים אותנו. אם אי אפשר לעשות שלום והמצב ככה לא יכול להישאר, אז צריך לטפל בהם בדרכים אחרות, אין מה לעשות.
I think we should give them a country. If you're doing any problem, you just go in there to give them a country, and then it's going to be a war between countries, If they're going to throw rockets, we're going to throw one big one and done.
It's pretty chilling. So here's Saul Staniforth highlighting what Gideon Levy was saying about the point that it's not the extremists in this conversation that actually established the occupation. It was the so-called moderates. So think about that in the context of who's actually driving the boat right now. And really that the idea that, remove Netanyahu, it'll all go back to the good. What good? What are we talking about, right? This has always been rooted in the worst of human, the worst of human action. And I'm not talking about every Israeli or every Jew. I'm talking about the Zionist organization that has, from the beginning, been about the worst of human society, about occupation and apartheid and hatred and bigotry and racism. That's, as Avi said himself, Zionism is racism. So what he's telling you is that Netanyahu out of the way, look, they're the ones right beneath him, even the moderate ones we call them, are just the same.
No doubt that the rhetoric of those fascists who would answer the definition of neo-Nazis, would they be Europeans like Bezalel Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and those, no doubt that their rhetoric is really by far more extreme than the more civilized rhetoric of the central left. Maybe their plans are much more crazy. But by the end of the day, the real danger is from the so-called moderate ones, because they put the basic and they established the occupation. They established the settlement project, and they're establishing now the apartheid system. And they do it softly or relatively softly, and therefore they are much more destructive because nobody gets against them. They do so-called normal things, that the silent majority is supporting both in Israel and in the world, while the extremists at least create some kind of alarm. So we should concentrate on the mainstream of Israel. This is our problem.
It's concerning. It makes an excellent point. And this is like a guarantee, as it already seems is happening, they're going to try to act like it's just one bad apple. And this is the problem, is that this is an ideology that is spread all around the world, as we've highlighted recently. The majority of Zionism around the world appears to be Christian. So this game they play where somehow that's only about, you're highlighting Zionism, that you hate Jewish people. Well, that doesn't even make logical sense. It's not the truth, at least from my perspective, but it's also not logical seeing as how the majority of Zionism is Christian today. The problem is about the ideology, not the religion they're using behind it. As Quds News Network highlights, this is what we're seeing from these people. And what he's doing here is walking up to some women and calling them names and acting like they're in his face all of a sudden. And then the statement he simply makes is, don't worry, we're going to kill you all. We'll kill you all. This is the epitome of Zionism as far as I can see today. Oh, and there's cursing in this. If you got children around, heads up.
Go, bitch. Why she has to go? Go, bitch. Why she has to go? Go, bitch. You, bitch. Go, bitch. Go, bitch. Go, bitch.
Like, right, so he walks up to them and starts doing that. Like, these people are something wrong with these people.
You baby killer! Get the fuck out of my face, Shadamuta. Killer, that's what you are.
Those are ugly. Says some word in there. I'm sure some derogatory term. It doesn't, it doesn't even matter. And then here, this is the part where they catch him saying that. All right, we're gonna kill you. We're gonna kill you all. Fantastic. But it's all about Hamas, though, right? Tiberius highlights the important reality. Suppressed News posted this. He's simply highlighting, saying Zionism has always been terrorism. It's the reality. This is from 1946 from the New York Times. Britain asked Zionists to disavow terror. Why? And I've made this point before. Even with people that are very knowledgeable on the history of Zionism, I think I even looked this up on, I think both on Wikipedia and then on I think it was Jewish Archive. It's a stated reality that the Lehi Party, which is the founding element of Zionism, literally called themselves terrorists. I think and I'll show, and that's right here. I'll show you in a second. This is, and the sources are where you should look, not Wikipedia, but it's saying the group referred to its members as terrorists and admitted to have carried out terrorist acts. I'll make a point about this in a second. It's just crazy. This is the foundation of Zionism. It's what it is. And every day since, they have been rewarded for their acts of terrorism. Here's another one. This is actually wild to me. Now, this gets into flirting with the line of Zionism and Nazism, which is, if you remember, is not a far-fetched concept. I've done an entire show on this, Zionism versus Nazism, and the point is that it's easy to identify. And at this, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but we've shown you this many times. The idea that the Lehi Party, as Dan Cohen covered, and this is from a Haaretz article itself, continued to seek an ally of Nazi Germany, even after the final solution. And yet we're told Israel was founded to protect from something like that, even though the founding elements of Zionism were aligning themselves with Nazi Germany during and after the final solution. I mean, how do you make sense of that? Or things like this, Zionist activists who collaborated with the Nazis from Haaretz. But first, a real world current example, which it kind of blows my mind that he doesn't realize how ridiculous this is. He says, and this is from, he is a former Likud member and prominent member of the Zionist organization. He says, as Hitler, may his name be erased, once said, quote, I cannot live in this world if there is one Jew left in it. He goes, we could not live in this land if even one such Islamo-Nazi remains in Gaza. And not before we return to Gaza and turn it into Hebrew Gaza. Okay, let's unpack that a little bit. So he's quoting Hitler and throws in may his name be erased, whether he means that or not, and says that Hitler said, I can't live in this world if there's one Jew in it. Then goes, we cannot live in this land if there's one Gaza person in it. Now he calls them Islamo-Nazis. So he's trying to make the argument that it's because we don't like Nazis like that. But yet you're missing how does he not recognize that you're going, what Hitler said? That's how we feel against what we see are Nazis. But you're still going, yes, the same thing. We both feel the same way. We can't live there if there's one of those people left that we don't like. How in the world do you not recognize that you're like, the Nazi thing, that's what I think, but about Nazis? I mean, that's wild to me. And it's Moshe Feiglin, as BM writes, who is an Israeli himself, an anti-Zionist Hebrew. He says, his bio says anti-Zionist Hebrew. It says, this guy, by the way, spearheaded years ago the attempt of the extreme religious right wing to take over the Likud party and gain control over Israel's ruling party. He definitely succeeded in that, even though he himself quit the party in 2014. Unreal. It says, we are not guests in our land. This whole land is ours. Oh, and then the point about making Gaza a Hebrew Gaza, like that's not supposed to be the thing you say out loud. The Biden administration and even lots of Israeli government that speak when they know the U.S. is watching will go, no, we're just going after Hamas and we're caring for the Palestinians. And, we're not going to do any things we claim that we're not doing, like displacement and occupation. Those are all fake stories. As they're literally having entire conferences about how they're going to take all of Gaza, how they're literally building things already, it's just embarrassingly obvious, and I think everybody sees it. And yet, nonetheless, they're still pretending in front of the world. It's painful. Here he is telling you, like everybody else, like these settlers themselves, that we're going to do this, speaking right to Biden on the camera. It says, and now the one who we had to get all along with him somehow, because he also lived there, and we have to be humane, all of course. Like, oh, what a struggle, right? How I feel so bad for you. You have to be humane. Like, that's how he's from, because we have to be humane, of course. Can't just kill him. Yeah, but you are. And it says he showed that he represents the deepest Islamo-Nazi. Think about how dumb this is. This is vanilla ISIS, guys. There's Islamo-Nazism. Are we now just ignoring what these things at root actually mean and just jamming together what bad guys? That's the same as saying, oh, yeah, well, they're white supremacists, but they're working with the jihadis over here because, they both hate our freedom. It's just, they just are lazy. You can't, and the idea that in any way Hamas or any way aligns with ideas of Nazism, or for that matter, ISIS, they're actually very contradictory to both. It's not to say, like I said before, it doesn't mean support your binary thinking out there. It's just static fact. It's not the reality. But the only reason they do that is to try to go Nazi, Nazi, Nazi because we're Jewish. That's what they're trying to do. All of it's a ploy. These are Zionists using all of it to manipulate you, whether or not they're Jewish. And it says, as it's clear to us, we cannot live with as Hitler, may his name be erased, once said, I cannot live in this world if there's one Jew left in it. And then right after, we cannot live in this land if even one such person, as he calls his laws of Nazis, remain in Gaza. Wow. So make sure you watch this. If you haven't seen it, this show's important. We also talk about Israel's connections to extremist ideology and the ADL's very public and provable history of faking Nazi marches. It's crazy how much people don't know. Now, this is actually wild to me. This is a clip that Muhammad Shihada played. Now, if you want an extremely obvious example of the kind of propaganda you would expect from like a North Korea or from Nazi Germany, here's Israel putting out a weird video having children sing in unison about bombing Nazis in Gaza. That's what they're doing. This is creepy as hell. Bombing, destruction. What a nice little casual child song. Violate the swastika bearers. Like, not only is it ridiculous, I mean, what swastika bearers? Like this game you play, like they're all waving Nazi flags. Like, if that's the best they can do, how did they ever get here? But these are children. They're having sing. Doesn't this remind you of something right out of some like spoof parody of North Korea? I'm telling you guys, there's something very, very wrong with these people. And they I'm talking about Zionism, and they believe that this is somehow going to convince you, or anybody for that matter, that we're supposed to be singing along with killing people in Gaza as it's an open genocide and children are dying as they're singing this, but swastika bearers, so it's all okay. They were showing images of destroyed Gaza. Images of bombing people that we can prove are civilians, by the way. There will be nothing there, it says. Proudly, from a state-sanctioned entity, posting and singing about what they otherwise pretend isn't happening. Because that's how dumb they think we are. They'll go tell Biden and Blinken, no, we're going to fight for human rights, and we care about Palestinians, and we'll make sure we can reconstruct and give it to... But they'll publish and frame a song. Nothing will be left. Kill them all. Yeah, that's really not hard to see. Within a year, we will annihilate everyone. That's what it says. I mean, just really let that sink in as they're telling you that they're protecting all the good ones. I mean, this gave me chills. Like, it's so creepy. Not only because it's such a weird, almost like not North Korea-esque propaganda, but because they just don't care. It's right in your face. They're laughing at you while they do this because Biden will toe the line. Because Macron and everybody else, whoever's in power now, or Richie Sunak, they'll all toe the line. Apparently, they don't even care that we don't see it or we don't agree. They don't need us to agree, apparently. I guess, or they're just desperate. It's unnerving. Now, here are just a couple of overlaps. This is from Haaretz from 2023. Israel's government has neo-Nazi ministers. That's supposed to be fake news, blood libel, conspiracy theory, right? From Haaretz. It really does recall Germany in 1933. Holocaust historian Daniel Blattman says he is astonished at how quickly Israel is hurtling towards fascism. He says the moment the judicial reform passes it'll be another reality. Of course, this overlaps with exactly what you're probably thinking right now with the judicial reforms and the game, and I talk about it in this show, of, oh yeah, they have a completely independent judiciary, right? So ICC, get out of here. You don't have any place here because they're completely independent. Except everybody knows that's not true, and everybody's been highlighting exactly what Netanyahu's doing, that it's the opposite of that. And I have the one I pulled up to get that link. Let me grab it real quick. This is an important one. A Canadian judge is talking about this in 2018. Without an independent judiciary, Israel's cherished democracy will be at risk. And the thing that she's highlighting as the moment that will change already happened. So let's keep pretending, Blinken, that there's an independent judiciary, so there's no reason. No, they're all telling you that's long since been passed. And the judicial reforms that are about to, they're all kind of hinging right now because of what's going on, are only going to make it even worse. They're telling you this. And yet they're pretending, don't worry, they can enforce on themselves because they're not completely overtaken by the government. So get out of here, ICC. There's no crimes. We'll threaten your families. Yeah, the good guys. As it says down here. The heart of the story is judiciary. The appointment, 2023, mind you, the appointment of judges and legal advisors, the dismantlement of Israel's High Court of Justice, things that have happened. Bibi's Bibiist populism, as in Netanyahu, which is backed by the power and clout of the fascistic Masonic types who surround him. Zionist religion, the religious Zionism party, the ones that we're talking about, Smotrich, Ben-Gvir, in power right now. He says, for whom integrity was never a value, is taking its final step towards fascism. From the moment the Netanyahu crossed the Rubicon in regard to its preserving the supremacy of the law and independence of the Supreme Court, meaning crossing that barrier as in removing those things, he went de facto, even if he does not understand it or give it any thought, from being a traditional populist leader into the saliently fascistic style. I mean, it's just so plainly obvious. These people are the bad guys, okay? They are the ones rushing you into we're watching them murder children on TV. And your governments, as their own media, they're one of the most popular platforms in their entire media apparatus, are going, look, these are terrible, dangerous, fascist people. They're ruining our judiciary. And then a year later, they're going, don't worry, they're independent judiciary. They can do whatever. Get out of here, international law. But we respect the law. It's embarrassing and it's scary. Let me include this one for you. Here. Oh, and this was the article I discussed, the independent judiciary at length, if you want to look further at that and realize that that's another game they're playing. In case you missed what I'm rapidly talking about, the point is that they claim they're not, the ICC or the ICJ and these international elements, they're not allowed to go after Israel because they have a working judiciary of their own. And the argument is, well, it's only meant for countries that can't enforce on themselves. But we're proving that's not the case. Here is another article from 2020. The Zionist activists who collaborated with Nazis and were executed by Jewish partisans. The history is shockingly obvious, guys, and it just takes the effort to look at it. As Dan Cohen highlighted in 2023, Ezra Yachin, that one that was this guy here, that was paraded around as the oldest living reservist, who literally was saying these are animals that can no longer live, about every Palestinian. I mean, it was again, obvious from the get-go. He simply highlighted that he was a member of the Lehi Party, the Zionist terrorist group that twice attempted to ally with Nazi Germany and sought to found a copycat fascist state. He highlights the actual document that shows that they were trying to align themselves with Nazi Germany. And again, it's literally easy to look up on Wikipedia, for crying out loud. The point is that the Lehi, according to Haaretz even, continued to seek an ally with Nazi Germany, and once with Stalin, by the way, after the final solution. Here's the Lehi Party in general. Actually, I bet you it's even in here. Right? See, look at this. I mean, it's so crazy. It initially sought an alliance with fascist Italy and Nazi Germany. And by the way, did. And it says the group referred to its members as terrorists and admitted to having carried out acts of terrorism. Now, they distanced themselves from it, the Israeli government, acting like it was a stain on their history, but weirdly brought it right back around. Now give Lehi pins to people. Lehi pins. Because, you know, we support terrorism is what that says. Here's Tiberius highlighting from, I think it's 1981, an article, or 91, saying Shamir says terrorism was, quote, acceptable for Jews, not Arabs. That's the Associated Press. Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir, recalling his days as a guerrilla commander, said yesterday that Jews were justified in using terrorism to win statehood, but that Palestinians were not. That's very objective. That's from the Prime Minister. Saying this out loud. The point is, it's always been that easy to see, guys. And let's not forget, Israel has been arming neo-Nazis for a long time in the Azov movement, in Ukraine, or plenty of other places, I argue, fascism or any kind of entity that, like ISIS, for example, that they work with, that they clearly are using the U.S. and Israel and the rest of them, which is a provable fact. Here's one. If you haven't seen, rights groups are demanding back in 2018 that Israel stop arming the neo-Nazis in the Azov movement. And that's confusing for you, then you haven't been watching so far. I mean, it's very obvious what's going on here. They lie about this, and I'm not talking about Israelis or Jews. I'm talking about the Zionist organization pretending to be something that it's not. This one's, of course, to recognize that the United States government has suddenly lifted a ban on arming the Azov movement. How does that work? Have they not already been arming them this entire time? Yeah, they really have. And that's my point. I said this to Matt Miller earlier today. When he's like, we've designated this Swedish group as dangerous neo-Nazis. And I'm like, okay, now do the Azov movement. Go. You guys are ridiculous. The point is that they have allowed them to be armed, even as it violated their own legislation for a very long time. Now they just say, oh, now we changed that and now we can lift the ban. You've been arming them the whole time. What's the difference? The point is these guys are very dangerous. And I said, not only is this outrageous, as they're one of the most dangerous groups on the planet, but it also shows, as I pointed out many times, that they've been illegally doing so this entire time. How do they not recognize that, or they don't care? Even sending weapons to other factions who would give it to them was always illegal, guys. These people are dangerous. And I'll include this one from the account that I was using a while ago before I was reinstated on this platform, that these are verifiable facts. Congress made sure that the Azov Battalion would get arms all the way back in 2016, even though it was on the record that it was illegal. CIA has trained them since 2015, all on the record. FBI verified that the Azov Battalion is neo-Nazi, is immersed with Ukraine's government, and that those in Charlottesville, the Rise Above movement, were in fact their U.S. faction. Now, if that's shocking to you, check out these shows, or any million of them have done since. There's, of course, the game where Laura Loomer tried to swing in and take all this coverage from Alex Burns and others and pretend that she broke the story. Why? Weirdly, right before this whole Israel thing started. Do you think that's by accident? Because the whole game was to try to cement it for the right as only this, not Israel's not involved at all. The Israel is a huge and central part to this conversation. The point is, though, the Rise Above movement that marched through Charlottesville was the Azov movement, funded by Israel. Let it all sink in. The point is clearly this was about manufacturing the domestic terrorism idea, as well as many other things. Trying to blame Russia was one of these things, to blame it as, they're the one creating all this stuff in the United States. And in this one of the articles, shows I did in March 30th, 2022, not just Azov, by the way, documents from the CIA that you'll write in this show down here in the source material prove that the CIA has been cultivating fascism in Ukraine since at least 1948, with a guy named Michael Lebed, who was an actual Nazi war criminal that they rescued and set up in a media group called Prologue in New York and in Ukraine. So at this time, the CIA was taking Nazi war criminals, as they're telling you they're shooting them, and they're putting them up in areas where they can propagandize Americans in New York. Of course, that makes sense, right? It's easy to look up. It's right in the documents. And this built since then, and they've been building fascist entities through this in Ukraine ever since. That's what we're staring at. Now, here's an important article. BM highlights a lot of these excerpts, doing a good job. Make sure you're following him. He highlights this article, which is an important one, which is new. This is from 2024, April. Resisting the, quote, ecstasy of war, Gaza through the eyes of religious left-wing Israeli soldiers, which I think is very relevant to what we just talked about. He says, for religious left-wingers, the moral complexities surrounding their military orders create a unique battle within. The point being, I think that's a side point to this whole thing. It's really showing you that they're extreme across the board. And some of this stuff should shock you. And some of this shows you exactly what they're pretending isn't happening. So it says 13 religious reservists, the central focus of the article, who served either in Gaza, on the Lebanese border, or in the West Bank, came from all over the country to what they call the faithful left confab, in the hope that someone would listen to them. The meeting attracted participants who wouldn't consider themselves on the political left. There were also mainstream religious Zionists, including settlers, and one ultra-Orthodox Jew. The moral complexity accompanying their military duties has stirred a unique battle within them. And it says he saw reservists armed with pamphlets from extremist rabbis. So this is the rabbis in uniform, in military gear, who are walking around on the ground in Gaza, what they're proletizing. What's the term for preaching, and use in ways that you'll see are dangerous. That it seems that a lot of them didn't even actually agree with. So it shows you this is coming from the Zionist leadership, trying to keep these people of the mind that it's okay to murder all these people in the eyes of your God, even though most of them are going, wait a minute, not the ones we're talking to here, at least how Haaretz is framing them. You can consider it how you want, that they go, wait a minute, that's not how Jews are supposed to act. And this does align with the idea of Zionism manipulating the concept. So here's what it says. He saw a reservist armed with pamphlets from extremist rabbis, such as Yigal Levinson and Zivi Tau, distributed by rabbis in uniforms, sent by the IDF, the IDF's Forces Department of Jewish Education. So think about how weird that is. You've got a military department of religious education. There's a reason this whole thing is very different. That would be the equivalent would be of the U.S. military preaching on the battlefield about Christian ideology and why that ideology suggests you can kill your enemies without worrying about it. That's what it says next. It says war, quote, shouldn't be treated as a mistake or error that we would prefer to avoid. This is the preacher, the rabbi, saying war is a great thing. These words echoed what an IDF rabbi, Amichai Friedman, said a month after the Israeli military response to the Hamas massacre began. Quote, I imagine in these days there are no murdered people, no hostages, no wounded, and then I'm left with perhaps the happiest month of my life. Weird. He says that rabbis in IDF uniforms came to lecture the soldiers. Quote, once a rabbi from Kiryat Arba in the West Bank said we need to destroy and shoot everyone, and that the IDF's rules of engagements ethics are, quote, distorted Western morality. This is chilling and needs to be clear to people. This is not a one-off. This is not a unique thing. This is from the leadership, the IDF military perspective, pushing their religious prophetic extremism on the individuals on the ground, who some of them don't even agree with it, which speaks to my larger point. Also, the dangerous reality of how extreme this all is. These are rabbis telling them, shoot everybody, children, women, everybody. And that the fact that we should care about that being a problem, that's just distorted Western morality. Now, what was that about our shared values, Blinken? More accurate than we realize when you think about their shared values, not the American people. It says calls to, quote, restore Jewish honor through intense military action weren't only heard among rabbis or far-left politicians. On October 7th, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu promised to, quote, avenge Hamas, and was quoted on social media citing the biblical verse, God to whom vengeance belongs. Days after the ground invasion of Gaza in the end of October, in a letter sent to Netanyahu, invoked a biblical commandment for Israelites to decimate their nemesis. Remember what Amalek did to you. Right? That means destroy everything. Tear up the ground, animals, children, everything. It says the main question that arose in the combatants' circle of the earlier point about them, collecting and talking about the war, how can we maintain our image as Jews who want to be ethical in the battlefield when we are ordered otherwise? Now comes a really interesting contradiction here. You're in the military. Now you've got military people ordering you and then using the rabbi's sentiment to say, now it's not even wrong to do this, murder those children. What if you have a problem with that? Same thing you argue in a U.S. military situation when they're in Iraq's circumstance, which is a provable case, when your leadership is ordering you to rape somebody. That actually happened. What do you do then? Well, obviously, you say no, right? But in this context, you then go to jail for that, the U.S. or Israel. But personally, I would say no either way. But it says, quote, we as religious people know what Amalek means. And what he's saying is that they weren't okay with it. They were uncomfortable with that reference. And it says, indeed, the concept of combatant circles is integral to the Israeli left, kibbutzism ethos, exemplified in the book, The Seventh Day, Soldiers' Reflections on the Six-Day War. Now, this is important because this goes into the previous wars. And it says, where soldiers gave raw testimonies of what they witnessed and did in June of 1967. And now this is the point we talk about, where they're censoring historical documents that simply highlight the cruel things they've done. And it says, Haaretz revealed in 2002 that, ironically, the testimonies of religious soldiers were excluded due to their positive view of war and occupation. You know, the occupation we're supposed to pretend isn't happening. A decision the editor at the time justified as moral. Right, so censorship, a moral thing to do. Oh, so now you're not a journalist anymore. You're acting in some religious morality that's not even actually moral. You see how this all is incestuous. It says the arrogance of the yeshiva students seemed to us power drunk with Masonic rhetoric, ethnocentric, apocalyptic, and in a word, inhumane. Also not Jewish, wrote Amos Oz, one of the book's prominent editors. So gee, I wonder why they didn't want the people to hear about this. So the editors and other Jewish people in the Israeli entity, in the Israeli sphere, were saying, we're quoting and trying to publish what these people were saying on the ground, or after going through the Six-Day War. The arrogance of the yeshiva students seemed to us power drunk with Masonic rhetoric, ethnocentric, apocalyptic, and in a word, inhumane. That's what we're seeing right now. He says the 6 censored soldiers became central figures in the educational and settlement enterprise, 3 of them establishing the extremist Gush Emunim settler movement. which I argue is what we're watching right now, push so aggressively to resettle this area. So the point is they censored these extreme ideas. So a lot of these central entities in this society didn't even get introduced to this. And now they're the ones that are central. I mean, they have made sure that these things work their way through. I'm talking about the power structure, guys. Now, again, my point is that the further back you look, more and more of the Israeli society did not align with these kind of extreme mentalities. And the more and more they grew and more children grew up into it, just like with the war-centered focus in the United States, it became normal. It's not an excuse by any means. It needs to be shut down. It needs to be recognized as a problem. But there's not everybody there that thinks that. This is a couple of weeks into the fighting in Gaza. This person, anonymous, and his team moved into local people's homes. This is currently what's going on. It says, it was surreal, he says. Everything is still there, including their pictures. It was the house they lived in, and we used it. That's not supposed to be allowed, guys. The claim is Hamas and tunnels and stuff, and they just, as we've seen 45 times over from them posting themselves, from 972 articles, or any number of other breakdowns, they're just stealing things. They're just breaking things. They're just burning houses. They're just destroying their homes and laughing about it. That's why I've never seen anything more obvious. It says when a house becomes a space that is occupied by the IDF, the soldiers leave behind what they call, quote, intelligence markings. It's just childish graffiti. It says, and therefore, quote, there are instructions not to leave the house as we found it. So literally admitting they were ordered to destroy the house, whether or not Hamas was there or a tunnel was there, which, by the way, I have barely seen any evidence of at all. And many times when we do see a tunnel we can prove later that Israel's the one that built it. In no way am I suggesting there's no tunnels from Hamas. I'm simply saying that it seems shocking how little we've actually seen proven by Israel continuing to make the same arguments. It says, quote, so we burned houses. And it says, it disgusted me being ordered to do it. Interesting. It says it felt difficult using other people's things, like the sofa and the refrigerator. It was also complicated by people taking things home, crimes. They took mishpacha, prayer beads. He says, I have to mention my officer positively. He is a staunch right-wing settler who opposed looting. So even see, it's interesting how the dynamics change. Morality exists in many angles, but it says it disgusted me that others took other people's property, knowing they would burn the house. And you have no one to argue with. It's Gaza. Everyone does whatever they want. Let that ring true. Everybody does whatever they want. It shows you a lack of leadership, a lack of any concern for decorum or any kind, law, morality, international law, and just revenge. Now, in regard to the right-wing person saying don't loot, that's just one small aspect. He's maybe likely out there murdering children or not caring about Palestinians. But the point is, for whatever reason, if that's true, he has a moral thing there. He goes, well, we shouldn't loot. Right? It's just interesting, isn't it? They want where these lines are drawn. Bottom line, all of this is wrong. It says we drove over graveyards. Who knew it would cause people to desecrate graves? All these are major admissions, guys. It says a few weeks later, he found himself in southern Gaza in a completely new situation, face-to-face with civilians, mostly refugees. Before that, the army said, quote, the people we saw were Hamas spotters. This time, they were just civilians. Now, that's not the reality, guys. The people they saw that were spotters, most of those were civilian. This has been shown by human rights groups, international entities. They were shooting anybody they came across, which, by the way, has already been made clear. I just don't know how, if any honesty in this world exists, this will not, at least at some point, end up being very, very clear in front of the courts in the international community, because they've admitted it every step of the way. He says, we took over an area that were very important to Hamas, as they were told, and we discovered that there were hundreds of civilians there. So at least they were told it was Hamas, but it seems to be a civilian location. We fired shells at the place right there. There's a problem. Fortunately, he says, we fired them that are not designed to blow up walls. How much you want to bet people died anyway? He says, quote, after we took control of the area, we had to send refugees further south in the middle of the night. It's a crime. In and of itself, it's a crime. And only then did I see the extent of the destruction. I saw elderly women bent over with canes and children and disabled people. I felt bad in my heart. It says, quote, and then we occupied a house again. This time, there were people physically there, and we had to kick them out. It's also a crime. When we saw their belongings, their food, their water, that they had lived here just a second ago. At this point, people started to break down. right? So you can argue some of the few that might be there that care about this. This is the ones that later leave and go and whistleblow because they realize that they're the bad guy. It says, he says he couldn't bear listening to the military rabbis preaching that we need to kill everyone. That's a quote. Because it angered him so much. He says, quote, that they supposedly represent our religion. He described seeing IDF rabbis in Gaza in an ecstatic state and understood that for many people, the mission went far beyond defending Israel. He says, quote, rather it was the joy of war for them. That's dangerous. He says that Gaza gives you a different perspective. You realize how people live there and how they lived before. You feel empathy and compassion for people because of, guess what? Before October 7th, the lack of water, basic means of existence, but also anger and hatred. It does leave a mark on the soldiers. Some deny it, others acknowledge it. During a notorious Return to Gaza conference in late January, again, a conference about returning and occupying Gaza, boots in the ground style, not the current occupation they've continued to do, in which right-wing government ministers like Ben-Gvir, joined by the thousands of Israeli civilians, called to resettle Jews in the Strip. He says it was on the ground in Gaza. He had no idea that extremist politicians were causing international uproar with their promise to reoccupy the land. He says, quote, we felt we were representing Israelis and not the government, who failed us. As they're there, they think this way, right? He says, even so even if Netanyahu tweeted something, quote, that was not what inspired us. That's aimed at the Western audience, this guy. I've been telling you that the whole time. When a military rabbi came to the unit, he says, mentioned Amalek and blew a shofar, a religious aspect for Judaism, many people were cynical about it. As he recounts, he says, we had guys in our platoon whose homes were under attack on October 7th. Our friends were killed in combat. He says, cut the BS. So even as they're acting in a sense of almost revenge, they still recognize that they're being manipulated by the game of bringing out the rabbis and giving. It's just human beings. It says, quote, it's not about the abstract debate that develops on the righteousness of the war. It's logic and ethics, Levy says. And this is this guy here. He's what was he again? Professor Yago Levy, widely recognized as Israel's top researcher on the impact of the IDF on Israel society. And he says it's not about the abstract debate that develops on the righteousness of war. It's logic and ethics. He says, since, quote, we're aware of how directives on the rules of engagement aren't upheld, are not. That's a basic thing. We're all aware that they're not upheld. He says, and how shots are fired at innocent people just because they're in the area they shouldn't be in. It's obvious to everybody, other than liars like people like Zionists screaming online and Biden and the rest of them, and Trump and RFK Jr. This is alongside the disgraceful acts that contradict Jewish values. Now going forward, it says, like eating someone else's food without operational justification or destruction of property. He says, breaking the silence is I think it's a movie or it's capitalized, I forget what it was, like a documentary or a book. It says it's now embarking on the daunting task of collecting. Oh no, it says through testimonies to the anti-occupation breaking the silence organization. So basically it's an organization that's against occupation that's trying to collect this information. And it says it's now embarking on the daunting task of collecting and verifying soldiers' testimonies from Gaza, which I guarantee Israel's going to shut down because they're exposing their crimes. And it goes even further than Levy. A spokesperson for the organization says the religious acts by the IDF soldiers in Gaza, such as placing mezuzahs on the homes of displaced Palestinians or signs reading in Hebrew returning to Gaza, as we've seen everywhere, are not acts stemming from security, but are open, politically motivated statements. Of course we know that. Anybody honest can admit that. The organization decries the senior military command for, quote, not even attempting to prevent this from happening. Like, that's my point from the beginning. They're not capable of controlling their own military, which shows you how out of control they are, or they don't care. It says the spokesperson adds that this complacency only reinforces Israel's complete disregard, that's a quote, for Gaza, facilitated by a group of extremist settlers who, quote, see the disaster of October 7th as an opportunity to entrench us all in perpetual occupation of the Strip, which is already happening. But think about this, the idea of foreknowledge. right? My point's always been it makes the most sense that there was some element of the government that let this happen for that very reason. And I still argue, even if that was the case, that this has gotten out of their control in the way that they dealt with it. But the point is, you can see that even they argued that there's a reason they wanted this to happen. And maybe they let it happen. Something we have to ask ourselves. Lastly, it says, the more violent and the more you believe in war, the more authentic a Jew you are. When you talk about peace, you become westernized. Swartz says of perceptions in his military milieu. The point is that this is how they think on the ground in some cases. The more violent, the more in war, the more aggressive you are towards Palestinians, suddenly you're more of a Jew, but you're not. You're more of a Zionist. But they're using your religion to trick you. And it says, however, there are prominent, and it says the more you talk about peace, the more westernized you are. So as you're pretending shared values, as they're pretending that this is we're on the same team, your own government, their own religious extremism is driving you to think that any positive, any peace, or that you're being westernized. So there's a derogatory sense to that, guys. Same thing we've always been telling you. It says, however, there are prominent voices and rabbis in Jewish literature, and throughout that offer a completely different view. Today, the establishment sees the Amalek affair as one in which every Arab is guilty and no one is innocent. As the language that continues Jewish tradition, he says, and then the Jewish canon, Swartz painfully says, turns into semi-Hamas. Basically saying by their own actions, they're turning themselves into a form of Hamas themselves. He says many religious reservists like Swartz and enlisted to protect their homes and families, and in the hope of freeing more than the 250 Israelis who were initially abducted to Gaza, they did not embark on a journey of revenge and destruction. Now, I don't know if I'd agree with that, but that's what he's saying. Their battle, when they return to their old lives, is twofold. Against the religious community that rejects peace, and against the leftist camp that rejects faith. The struggle of religious leftists is perhaps the most revolutionary one in Israel today, as it reveals the complexity of Jewish power and demands an answer to it. After 75 years of occupation, independence, he says, including 5 decades of occupation, Israel doesn't know what to do with its power over the land. Whether to strengthen it at the expense of repressing millions of Palestinians who will never be deterred and will resist violently, and legally so, to use it for restraint, to create a horizon for peace or any reality that deviates from the present one. They have an opportunity to offer a genuine alternative to Israeli Jewish supremacy. That's how he's framing it. That's what it is. Exactly because they use religious language to debunk and expose the lie of a religious far-right ideology. That's what everyone's leaning into in the governments we're talking about, the US and the Western governments. They're leaning into the extreme right-wing ideology of the current religious Zionism party, or rather the coalition which they're a part. And even their own people on the ground are calling them out for what they are, guys. The ones that are destroying everything that they claim they are. It says they could be the only effective challengers to the idea that Israel's existence can only be interpreted as an oppressive apartheid regime, paving a new route away from war, death, and never-ending pain. Interesting. Now, in no way am I arguing this is some kind of an indication that, let's put it, to make it clear, as I've said from the beginning, the legal reality should be that this is all Palestine, period. That's the reality. However, I side with most of the Palestinian resistance in the sentiment that a two-state solution is the logical way away from more conflict. Because to just displace other Israelis in the same way, because it's been a long time since this happened, and many of them just were born there. The point is that the two-state solution makes the most sense. And that's what most of the Palestinian side is actually calling for today. And I agree with that. But just to be clear, the legal reality is this is occupied territory in Palestine. That's what it is. So I'm not suggesting that we should make some kind of realize that, I think that's obvious, needs to be stated. And the legal reality of what should be done needs to benefit the side of the Palestinians because they're the ones that have been taken from. But to make this actually resolve, we should be calling for something, which, by the way, the Israeli government has never wanted and now explicitly said they'll never allow, which is actually a state for Israel, which means they're not going to remove them from the world, and a state for Palestinians. I just think that's obvious. The mindset of most of the people on the ground make it very clear that that might not be possible, not because of Palestinians, but because of the rabid Zionist ideology that clearly is leaning into the idea of absolute hate at all costs. And not just saying it's allowable, but that it's good. And doesn't that make sense right now with what we're seeing? That I keep saying, not just that they're saying, yes, this is necessary. They're saying, yes, this genocide is the right thing. It's defending themselves. That's Zionist ideology for you right there. The rabbi going around saying, no, they're not, they're bad. They're not, they're in the eyes of God. You're allowed to kill all those children. Like that's kind of the mindset they're putting forward. Same thing we're seeing. Not just that it's happening, but it's okay. It's good, praiseworthy. It's the exact opposite. And you know what? Frankly, you see it. The world sees it. Here's another example of that from the UN about the Nusrat rescue operation, as it still stupidly says on Wikipedia. And I'm sure people that only listen to Zionists will just go UN, Hamas, and just reject it. But the point is the evidence around this is already shockingly obvious. This is just the UN outlining exactly what their independent investigation found. Their own UN experts condemn the outrageous disregard for Palestinian civilians during Israel's military operation in Nusrat, June 14th. And it says, the UN human rights experts today strongly condemn this is interesting they use this term, the umpteenth massacre, simply meaning just there's been so many that it's like just yet another one, a long line of mass. That's important to recognize. These people are done with this. The umpteenth massacre by Israeli forces in Gaza during a hostage rescue operation, which they weren't hostages, they were military targets, so POWs or detainees, in the operation in Nusrat refugee camp, which killed at least 274 Palestinians, including 64 children, injuring 700. On 8 June, Israeli occupation forces, allegedly assisted by foreign soldiers, which it's not alleged, there's images of it, entered Nusrat disguised as displaced persons, so that's a huge crime in and of itself, and aid workers, huge crime, in a humanitarian truck. So those that keep trying to dispute that, that was the fact. It wasn't one of the long, quite frankly, I think that both were used, but we can prove, the one we can prove is the smaller white ones that are used for aid delivery. So as just make it clear, even UN is making this clear that they did use a humanitarian aid truck. So think about the game they're playing as they're targeting aid trucks and stopping it as they use an aid truck to deliver an assassination campaign. They violently raided the area, assaulting residents with intense ground and air attacks that spread terror, death, and despair. Now, yes, they did ultimately take back, I think, 4 hostages, but they killed 3 in the process and killed 274 innocent people and have killed far more people, hostages, than they've actually rescued in general. So these people trying to pretend like this is like how dare you not cheer for the success? It's just such tired and flimsy propaganda to shout you down because you're racist by highlighting that this isn't, even if you support Israel, you should be going, absolutely not. Which, by the way, any honest Israeli is right now doing. And I'll show you an example of that. But of course, the ones that are not there, who are acting like they're all, people like Mikey Rappaport and the rest of them are like, yeah, dear success. How dare you say saving people is not as good? They killed 3 hostages to save 4. I don't know if you can do math, bud, but that's pretty bad. They don't care, though. They're propagandists. Now, it says, according to survivors, the streets of Nusrat were filled with bodies of dead and injured people, including children and women, lying in pools of blood. Walls were covered in body parts, scattered by multiple explosions and bombed houses, the experts said. This is crazy how graphic this is. This is from the UN. They particularly condemned Israeli forces for treacherously hiding in a humanitarian aid truck coming from the US-built pier, also a part that needs to be understood. They try to downplay it. We'll get to the pier in a second, how suddenly they're like, yep, no more pier now. Oh, what do you know? So I guess it wasn't about aid the whole time. We're shocked. That's the case. They're now shutting it down, apparently, at least for now. And the point is, it was always about that. It was never about aid. It's the weapons and Israeli operations, guys, being used like they always are. But it says acquiring civilian disguise to conduct a military operation constitutes perfidy, which is strictly prohibited under international humanitarian law and tantamount to a war crime. They've done it many times. They don't care. They just act like Hamas, bad guy. Law doesn't apply, right? When we say Hamas, I guess that's the way they think about it. These tactics put aid workers and the delivery of much needed humanitarian aid at even greater risk and expose an unprecedented level of savagery in Israeli military actions. The World Food Program has already announced that the pause of its operations because of their security concerns of what they just did, which they then blame them for, which is hilariously stupid. The experts noted that Israel had an opportunity to free the hostages without further bloodshed 8 months ago, and 7 months ago, and 6 months ago, and 5 months ago, like 12 or 13 times now. Provable, easy to prove. When the first ceasefire deal was presented, they say 8 months ago, instead, Israel has systematically rejected ceasefire proposals. preferring to continue its assault on Gaza, which has even taken the lives of their own hostages. Easy to prove. All the while, Israel has claimed to be engaging in military operations to, quote, save them. Being called out, man. Using the pretext of seeking to rescue hostages to justify excessive use of force exposes Israel's criminal actions, including through humanitarian camouflage, and tell us that they have reached a whole new level, the expert said. The military operation in Nusrat stands out as one of the most heinous acts in Israel's destructive assault against Palestinian people since October 7th, which has killed over 36,000 people, as according to Euromed Human Rights Group, over 45,000, injured over 80,000, displaced and starved 2 million people in Gaza. That's everybody. While violence against Palestinians in the West Bank and East Jerusalem also continues unabated. Wild. Now, I know plenty have already decided they're going to dismiss anything the UN says. I'm not telling you to blindly trust it. Use your own discernment, guys, and look at what else is happening and consider how the UN has always been very wishy-washy about Israel and are now coming out, as much as they love to frame it as, bias. I mean, if you want to call bias simply highlighting, and in a soft way, I would argue, what's actually happening, then sure, call it bias. That's what's going on. And it's important to see that they're actually calling this out. Now, Elon Levy, of course, Kenneth Roth, excuse me. I think I had it right there too. He says the Israeli hostage raid seemed in part to use a soldier or more dressed as a civilian. It's proven, easy to prove. This is the war crime of perfidy. Is that how you say that? I think it's a weird pronounced perfidy, probably like that, perfidy, when it results in death or injury because it endangers civilians. That's why soldiers wear uniforms in combat. Pretty simple. And this is a Guardian article. So you could argue he's not even saying, he's just highlighting what the Guardian said, right? Now, they have him recognized as somebody that they claim as an anti-Semite because he highlights Israel's crimes. Simple as that. And he worked for Human Rights Watch, and Human Rights Watch has historically called out Israel's an apartheid state, so he's bad guy, right? That's how this works. Even though what he just highlighted is one of the most easily identifiable, provable things that even Israel has highlighted, they just don't want a crime. That's how dumb this is. Now, here's what he said. Quote, human rights, in quotes, organizations hate Israel so much, like you can just almost see him stomping his feet right now. They hate us so much, they want you to uncover rescue missions as crimes. That's the best you got, bud? That's the best you can do? Stomping your feet and crying foul? You're racist. That's all they got. They hate you so much that they want to call rescue missions war crimes. No, they want to call war crimes war crimes. Sure, you can claim you rescued them. Don't you care that you killed 3 people to rescue 4 of your own people? Apparently not, because you don't care about them either, Elon Levy. He says, if rescuing hostages held in brutal conditions by Hamas is a war crime, I know millions of people who'd be happy guilty. It's just like, you can't take this person seriously. Nobody believes these people anymore. I'm willing to bet you that they're getting false engagement from all the bots. Because they seem to get the same exact amount of engagement every time. Anybody... And what's even funny is he quotes the tweet, which allows you to read the fact that they're committing a very clear crime, right? And the point is, they admit they dressed as civilians. So you're just going, ignore that. Don't mind the man behind the curtain. You're a racist. It's the best he can do. I genuinely am starting to feel bad for these people, but then I'm like, oh yeah, you're a terrible war crime. As a Zionist, so I don't anymore. Or the fake human rights lawyer, Arsen Ostrovsky, highlights the same thing. And just quote tweets it, because he doesn't want you to read the article, of course. And he says, you will not find a worse human being on the planet than Ken Roth. That's your example of the worst human being? How about all of your people calling to kill children? How about a fake human rights lawyer who calls for starving people? It's like they don't even recognize how bad they look, or maybe they're just that desperate. I think that's what it is. Here is the kind of thing he wants you not to look at. While calling a guy highlighting a very clear crime the worst person on the planet, here is a child speaking to the international community and holding up a U.S. bomb, saying, do you pay your taxes to kill us? Listen up, Americans, because that's what's happening. A Palestinian child shows an American-made munition used by Israeli tanks to destroy Gaza, addressing Americans whose government sends their tax money as weapons to Israel to assist the killing of Palestinians, to a government that doesn't need your aid. Zachary Foster highlights, even those that are pushing back in Israel, because there are plenty of them, if you organize a peaceful protest against the mass murder of Palestinians, as these individuals did on October 19th, actually. You'll be shot at, arrested, in prison for 110 days in a torture dungeon. He's using that, the same way they do, but the point is in their prisons, it's the actual thing that happens. Welcome to Israeli democracy, he says. Human rights defenders, and it's Ahmad Khalifa Mohammed Abu al-Tir, are facing severe charges for chanting commonly used slogans during a Palestinian war protest, anti-war protest. 110 days in jail, shot at, because they said the wrong thing. But democracy, though, right, guys? Let's all cheer for the democracy in the Middle East. Really? Sad and dishonest. Here is another example. Israeli police started sending undercover cops. So it's an overlap of both those stories, from an elite unit dressed as protesters in Israel to befriend and then arrest protesters at an anti-Netanyahu demonstration. Arrest them for what? For it being an anti-Netanyahu demonstration. You understand? It's not a democracy, guys. They don't live in the lie that the Western media pretends they do. They live in an authoritarian government, sort of like we're realizing we do too. They arrest them. They've also been intimidating with phone calls to activists, attempting to recruit snitches to collaborate on them. This is what your government does too. Gee, I wonder where they've got the they both emulate each other. Just recognize how crazy that is. And point attack and arrest them. This guy's changing his look. It's clear. The guy with the flag on his back. Changing his hat. Like there's very shifty stuff going on. The point is, that's against Israelis, Israeli Jews, who just have a different opinion. Let's all scream democracy. Here's a really powerful breakdown from the Human Rights Council from the United Nations. It says this is an advanced, unedited version, report of the Independent International Commission of the Inquiry of the Occupied Palestinian Territory, including East Jerusalem and Israel. Now, we referenced this the other day. Now, I wanted to show you a couple search terms here. First one was Hannibal Directive. So just to show you again, the commission is aware of allegations that the occupation forces used the Hannibal Directive to prevent the capture of Israeli civilians and the transfer to Gaza, even at the cost of killing them. Now, they're saying allegations, right? Okay, it says, the commission documented one statement by the ISF tank crew, security force, I think is what it stands for, Israeli security force, confirming that the crew had applied the Hannibal Directive by shooting at a vehicle which they suspected was treated. You know all this. We've played the guy saying that. But it's amazing how people act like that's conspiracy theory. It's on the record. Helicopter pilots, one of the security heads of Kibbutz Be'eri, on the record. How Israelis themselves saying they watched it happen. The commission also verified information indicating that at least 2 other cases, they'd likely applied the Hannibal Directive, resulting in the killing of up to 14 Israeli civilians. That's their own investigation with evidence they could prove this is what's going on. I was making sure I didn't miss something down there. And it's just the understanding of it. So other terms I want to search for. Throw a term in the chat, by the way. If you want to search for something, if I catch it, I'll grab it real quick. But let's look up this one. There's only one example. The commission has reviewed testimonies obtained by journalists and the Israeli police concerning rape, but has not been able to independently verify such allegations. There you go. Over and over and over. This is about both sides, by the way, about both Israel and the occupied territories. The point? They're not able to confirm, despite the claims of Israeli entities and police, that rape ever took place on October 7th. Doesn't mean it didn't, but it means we have got to be objective, like the article and their quotes. Those things matter, guys, and stop just floating the idea that they were raped or you're not allowed to say they weren't. There's no evidence for it, guys. We've been saying it from the beginning. It didn't happen at this moment if we can't prove that. We have to go as if it could have. We don't know. At this moment, the evidence shows we did not see that. And it's been this way for 8 or 9 months now. And let's not forget the beginning when they clearly said, we don't have the forensic evidence. Extermination. So this is important. It says, the commission found, I thought there was more than one of that. Huh. I guess not. But it says, the commission found that the crimes against humanity of extermination, murder, gender persecution, targeting Palestinian men and boys, forcible transfer, and torture and inhumane and cruel treatment were committed. Not maybe, but were. Again, this is, as far as I'm concerned, it's like saying the sky is up. I mean, it's just self-evident, but it's important to see that they're finding this stuff. Torture and starvation were the last two. I think that's the same one right there. There was a couple examples, though. It says at least 68 foreign nationals were killed on October 7th. The commission documented the torture, attempted beheading, and killing of Thai workers, which I find interesting, right? Now, this story is about the Thai workers, not Israeli Jews, but they don't care about those ones, right? It's only about the Jewish people we want to highlight for our narratives. There's, I think, easily half the conversation were about people that were hurt that weren't Jewish. But the point was that the Thai workers and the argument of how they were beheaded, the video, I argue, is completely unverifiable about who was doing it and how. But even then, their own snuff film that was put out does not show evidence of anybody actually being beheaded, according to all the journalists we've spoken to. In any case, the claim is that 68 foreign nationals were killed, which doesn't get talked about a lot in this conversation. But also the fact that either whether it's the Bibas family or other examples we can prove, Hamas did commit crimes. That should not be disputed. Anybody arguing that, I argue, is taking a dishonest stance, at least from one side of it. Just remember that. I think that's important. But the crimes are heavily slanted, even on October 7th, to Israel. I think it's easy to prove. That upsets a lot of people, but it's, I think, very clear. Now it says down here, the commission was unable to review the unedited version of testimonies, which shows you so much. So Israel is complaining they don't say their story right, and yet when given the opportunity, they only want to show them carefully edited select information. That's because they're lying. And they're propagandizing everybody. It's simply saying that their investigation by the Israeli authorities, I'll just read the whole thing. The commission has reviewed testimonies obtained by journalists and the Israeli police concerning rape, but has not been able to independently verify the allegations due to a lack of access to victims, witnesses, and crime sites, and the obstruction of investigations by Israeli authorities. Guys, that's what criminals do. Why in the world, if they're biased, we don't trust them? No one buys that. Even if you argue they are biased, the point is publicly put the information out. You're pretending those things exist. I think we've proven that they don't. They've already admitted to it in the beginning. They don't have it. Now they're just going, you can't look, but it's there. You're a liar. 9 months. They don't see it. The commission was unable to review the unedited version of such testimonies for the same reasons, the commission was also unable to verify reports of sexualized torture and genital mutilation, all of which has been proven to have not happened, according to Haaretz, even according to Bill Patton from the UN investigation that Israel was pushing. And then starvation, last one. The commission found that the war crimes of starvation as a method of warfare, murder or willful killing, intentionally directing attacks against civilians and civilian objects, forcible transfer, sexual violence, outrages upon personal dignity, and sexual gender-based violence accounting to torture and inhumane and cruel treatment were committed. Yeah, but UN Hamas, so whatever. That's all we get. The commission concludes that Israel has used starvation as a method of war. It's obvious, guys. Obvious. Now, to that point earlier, as Afshin Ratasi says, when the U.S. and Israel speak of their shared values, this is what they mean. Colonial barbarism. This is a new one's going around of this guy praying with these Palestinians just tortured behind him. Not Hamas, but Palestinians. Here is an example of Guantanamo Bay, I believe. In any case, as U.S. soldier torturing. Now, the point, I argue, is not U.S., but government, which is very different. This is U.S. government and Israeli government values. Now, both of which have a huge portion of the population, I argue, that would side with them. Doesn't mean everybody thinks that, but this is important. Here, as they highlighted in the torture side of this, there's branding, there's mutilation. This is being proven by their own reports. Here is Mutsem highlighting this. This is part of what's happening to Palestinians inside Israeli jails. Yet another example of a Star of David being carved into this person's back. And here is the other one we've talked about recently, or more than once. Remember this one? We covered this August 22nd, 2023. Before October 7th, Israeli forces execute Palestinians in the West Bank. Oh, the title doesn't even have to do with the image. Prompting shootings against settlers. This was an easily verifiable Star of David that was branded on his face. Originally, they denied it. We didn't do that. Except today, they're being held accountable for it. 7 Israeli cops expected to be tried for stomping a Star of David on a Palestinian's face last August. Just a good side example of how they go, lie, fake news, you're a racist. And they go, yeah, but here's how it happened. But you got the facts wrong. Oh, so you were lying the whole time. Every single time. Cuts News Network highlights another example of this person who's on his last day deployed, seems to be walking around in civilian clothing and simply says, Gazans, you have nowhere to return to. We're going to make you miserable. You are worthless. You will die. Yeah, totally objective. And it's all about the bad guy, Hamas, right? This is one of the shocking pieces of footage exclusively published by ZTO, showing an Israeli occupation soldier filming his last day in Gaza from a Palestinian house they had occupied and looted. The post reveals soldiers openly and proudly using genocidal rhetoric and degrading language to describe Palestinians, dehumanizing them. The footage documented their war crimes in Gaza, including burning down neighborhoods for revenge and targeting residential areas with detonations. We are going to make you miserable. You are worthless. You will die. Just find a way to make that about only Hamas, huh? Syrian Girl highlights Hananya Naftali, going back to one of these same old images we showed you in the beginning, saying Hamas burned these civilians alive. Like, despite the fact that their own media has already debunked these claims, showing you the burned alive level was because of the helicopter bombs or the missiles that they dropped, and the lies they were spinning about people burned alive in some cases were the tanks in the houses they burned to the ground. None of this, Hamas didn't even have the munitions capable of this. The point was, Israel burned them with Apaches. Their dreams were about stealing more Palestinian land. His point was, they had dreams, they had families. Hananya Naftali, this guy has just been putting out some of the most flimsy, they're phoning it in. I think they know they've lost. And by the way, this for the podcast, this is a Business Insider article. IDF combat helicopter targeting Hamas fighters at Nova Festival shot some party goers by mistake, says Haaretz, or on purpose. Here's an article from 24 years ago, from the year 2000. The Guardian. Israeli government report admits systematic torture of Palestinians. But it's just about October 7th, I've heard, right? Here's Omar Badar highlighting Israeli snipers in the West Bank killed 7 innocent Palestinian bystanders. Quote, even though the streets were quiet and the soldiers had no cause to open fire, according to Israeli media. He says there was exactly zero chance this could happen in an Israeli city without total U.S. media silence, or with total media silence. That's what's happening. No one's talking about this outside of Haaretz. In a single hour, Israeli sniper killed 7 bystanders at the Jenin refugee camp. No one even cares. They're just random innocent people. There's no Hamas present. They're not even talking about it. They just murdered them in the street, which, by the way, is what goes on in Gaza all the time. We just highlighted they're telling you that. We're making punish. We're going to punish them. We're going to make your life miserable. The point is, if this happened in Tel Aviv, it'd be everywhere, showing you the bias of the media. And on that same note, there's a reason that Haaretz is a problem for Israel right now. It seems to be that they're calling out some of the most important things. And guess what? Here's a Haaretz reporter being arrested by the military or the police. So much for free press, huh? Haaretz photographer arrested. Here's what it says. From Haaretz, their own photographer was arrested during the demonstration. I mean, think about this, guys. We're all the supposed values that Biden and the rest are screaming about: free speech, freedom of press. It's embarrassingly obvious that they don't care at all. They care about as little as your government does. They love pretending about it, though. Now, here's a couple of lies. When we're speaking about all the manipulations and lies. This one was just funny to me. Another constant Zionist propagandist, Ben M. Freeman, simply posted this with this weird Star of David graphic that was like a LGBTQ flag overlap. and simply said, I am a gay Jew and I would never go to, they made the point about how he couldn't live in Gaza, whatever, even though Roberts made it clear that there's an entire community there of gay people that are allowed to live peacefully. There's clearly a conservative religious perspective in there that argues they're wrong in what their lives are like, but they're allowed to live there. He's highlighted this. We did a whole article about it. And the same thing in Israel, by the way, they're allowed to live there too. But the point is, he's trying to make it out to be one side versus the good side, accepting of who I am. I simply said, okay. And by hate, do you mean from the Israeli government that ruled gay marriage is illegal in Israel, which is easy to prove? Or are we just pretending this is not the case for propaganda purposes? And he blocked me because that's what you do when you're, I said, I guess verifiable facts are not his thing. How embarrassing. This shows you there's a very clear problem with this propaganda. These people don't care about the truth. Here, this is the High Court rejects petition to recognize same-sex marriage. This is 2017. Supreme Court unanimously rejected a petition by Israel's LGBTQ task force and individual petitioners. They shut it down. You're not allowed to have gay marriage in Israel. So why is he then pretending that's not the case? Or why is he alluding to the idea that it's everything's good over here, but only over there in Gaza, you're going to be hated, which is not even true. Because there's a propaganda push desperately trying to hide the reality. Now, here's a great one, actually. This is actually pretty crazy. Perfectly timed. Here is Yunus Harawi highlighting what this person put out. And this is another one, too. AIPAC. AIPAC, the totally not foreign agent, says, all eyes on Rafah. Hamas turns homes in Rafah into bunkers for terrorism, which, by the way, there's no evidence. They're just showing holes in the wall. Why in the world? They just are so bad at their propaganda. But guess what? We can prove who made those holes, and it wasn't Hamas. Here's Yunus Harawi catching them in real time, showing you one that they later point to. I mean, how embarrassing is this? He goes, here's undeniable evidence from their own soldiers posting their own stuff on their own accounts, showing where they're making holes in Rafah walls. I mean, it's just embarrassing that they don't think people can see through this stuff. Emmanuel is a Times of Israel guy. And here he is going, look at them doing the things that they're doing themselves. It's just sad. Here's another one. If it'll load. I guess not. There we go. This is Hanania Naftali again. Just phoning it in. He says, a Jordanian pilgrim in Mecca yelled death to Israel and long live Hamas nonstop. Minutes later, he had a heart attack and died. I don't even know why I don't even know where that even comes from. Here's the reality. He says, first of all, and look, you can check this for yourself. I stress that you do. This is accurate. First of all, he says both videos show two men, which is weird. It does. It's two separate people. So it's like he didn't even care to look. And it says they're not the same person. Second, the guy really thinks nobody speaks Arabic. None of the two men are saying that. They're praying for freedom and peace. He says, get yourself an Arabic translator because y'all are ridiculous, to be honest. I mean, it's just, they don't care. They don't care. I mean, he must be able to check this stuff. He just does. It's volume. They're just dumping nonsense, maybe just to waste my time by talking about it. I don't know. But how embarrassing is that? Now, let's see where we are. We're at about 3 hours right now. I think we should be good on this. So this is Middle East Eye. I'm just going to play the beginning of this. It's basically about the ceasefire game that they're playing. And I called it the ceasefire starvation ploy because they're literally driving a starvation campaign, a famine, not just by playing with the ceasefire, but like deliberately underneath it, driving famine, and then acting like we're acting in good faith for a ceasefire when they have no designs to do so. Now, it's probably more than just driving a famine, but that seems to be the central problem right now. And this is Middle East Eye. What is standing in the way of reaching a ceasefire agreement between Hamas and Israel? They spoke to Palestinian author and academic Azam Tamimi and Daniel Levy, former Israeli peace negotiator, on why.
Keep telling us the Israelis have said yes, the only problem is Hamas. And it's transparently, patently obvious that that's not the case. So this is not constructive ambiguity. This is deceit. This is dishonesty. And as such, it is not going to move us forward.
What is making it so hard to reach a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas? And what are the factors or people getting in the way and why? Throughout the war, both Hamas and Israel have offered up ceasefire proposals via their intermediaries. Despite pressure mounting on the two sides, none of the proposals so far seem to satisfy both warring parties. So we asked some experts, Dr. Aizem Tamimi, a Palestinian academic and political activist, and Daniel Levy, a former Israeli peace negotiator, on why they think ceasefire negotiations have failed thus far.
Well, clearly ceasefire negotiations between Israel and Hamas, and of course they are conducted indirectly via the so-called mediators, the Qataris and the Egyptians, keep failing because Netanyahu and his governing coalition don't want to end the war except on their own terms. And their terms are impossible from the point of view of the Palestinians. They want the Palestinians to surrender.
And realize that that's counter to what the majority of Israelis now want, which is now being stated by Haaretz and other Israeli media. It's very clear. They want a deal. They want their families back. Then go back to Gaza. Then go, whatever. But that's first and foremost, no matter what, take whatever they're offering. And they're refusing, which shows you, I think at its core, they don't even want them back. I think that's obvious. Whether it's Hannibal Directive or whatever else, I think that's a clear part of this. It's not because the claim is the same. Let's just say they took the deal and got all the people back, gave all the people back in their prisons. They could just go right back to what they're doing. Of course, the world would say, look, they broke the ceasefire, but they would go, no, they fired a rocket or whatever. And people in the U.S. government would bow like they always have. You know, that's so easy to see. So the point becomes that I don't think it's obvious that there's something that is not just about the Hamas aspect, especially when you get into the game, how in the world you can have a ceasefire with a group that you claim you want to remove before the ceasefire takes place. It's ridiculous.
They want the Palestinians to succumb to Israeli occupation and give up on their right to resist this foreign occupation of their land.
In talks like these, there are a lot of complex details, but there's also a simple core question here. And the talks have consistently failed because they have not successfully addressed the Gordian knot where we are stuck. And that is between the position on one side, a Hamas position, but it wouldn't only be a Hamas position, that this actually has to be an end to the assault on Gaza. This isn't a temporary pause,
Yeah, I'll leave it there for time, but it's about 18 minutes. It's a good clip. You should check it out. The point, I think, is obvious, though, right? That if there's only one side that's truly holding this up, and that's against their own people's wishes, and that is Israel. And I mean, everybody can see that, other than the people invested in the Zionist agenda, and the government's either compromised or going along with it for many different reasons. Here is somebody who, again, I'm not a big fan of, just because of his willfully dishonest perspectives and stances during COVID-19. Now, I guess you could argue that he just completely doesn't see it, but I don't know how that's possible. But again, as I said the whole time, right now, whether it's an opportunism or whatever it is, there's a lot of people that are now again, I should be clear that he's been calling out the Palestinian-Israel thing for a long time. My point, though, is that, I just don't trust his honesty because for a lot of very clear reasons. That's not to say that what he's saying is wrong. I agree with what he's saying here. That is Mehdi Hassan. He's saying well, I'll just play it for you. And he's speaking with Owen Jones, who I think has been doing a great job on this. And it's just, they're just laughing about the obviousness of this, which it is that obvious.
Made me go mad is if I look at my Twitter, for example, where I spend a lot of time, as I know you do, I will see, for example, the US ambassador to the UN go, oh, they've accepted it, they just haven't done it publicly. And then I'll see the Israeli political coordinator at the UN, a woman who went on, I can't remember her name, a female diplomat from the Israelis. She sits in front of the Security Council and goes, we're carrying on the war till we destroy Hamas, which is not part of the deal. Then you look at another Blinken going, they've accepted the resolution. By the way, the resolution says in the text, I can't believe the UN Security Council signed off on this. Just a blatant lie. It says in the very top of the text, Israel has accepted this. There is zero evidence that Israel has accepted this. Netanyahu keeps saying, I am not stopping the war until I destroy Hamas, which is not part of Biden's deal. Biden's deal is...
Why can't we all be this objectively obvious? Like, if everyone can see that. You get these contorted Zionist narratives about how that equates to the same thing. It just confuses the issue. And a lot of people get confused by it and they check out. That's probably the point.
Hamas are done now. You've done enough damage to them. We get a permanent ceasefire. The Israelis do not want a permanent ceasefire.
The government does not want that. Now, I mean, you could make an argument that the Israelis themselves don't want a forever ceasefire, but it seems as if they're like, I think the sentiment, which seems to be pretty common, and even Haaretz has covered, is that at first, maybe they just wanted something to get their people back temporarily, to go back to it. Now they're saying, look, we don't care about the Palestinians, but take whatever deal they're offering to get our families back. Okay, and then that would be taking permanent ceasefire. So you could argue that I think it's clear, though, that the Israeli government sentiment is we don't care about that. We want to go after Hamas no matter what, or all of Palestine. But I just think it's an important distinction.
Which is fine. That's their prerogative. But why are you lying to us and saying they do when they keep telling us they don't?
Right.
You're quite right. So you're exactly right. Because what Hamas, that was the deal Hamas essentially accepted. The stumbling block now is Israel keeps injecting that there will be a permanent ceasefire once we have achieved all of our war aims, which is
who is the ceasefire with? Who is the ceasefire with? If you've just...
Yeah, exactly. But this
right. And this is the obvious point that everyone should be making. Like, if you want to argue that you want to deal with somebody else, then do that. But you see, the whole point is clear that they don't want this to happen. So they dishonestly engage with some fake process with the very group that even if they get everything that they want, they'll go, but not with Hamas, though, because we need to kill them first, because we've said that from the beginning. Well, okay, then why are we even doing this? Why are we pretending this back and forth is going to amount to anything when the whole point is you're dealing with Hamas to find that agreement? It is infuriating. And everybody with a brain can see that, which includes all the people that are lying to you about it.
That's exactly it. Obviously, there would be a ceasefire if they wiped out Hamas. And the point is, that's not going to happen. I mean, I found...
Israeli generals, by the way, say it's not going to happen.
Right.
Well, in Politico last month, you read this sometimes, and it actually makes me so angry, Mehdi. It makes me so angry. Because you got this briefing from US top intelligence people who presumably this is their life, this is their career, this is what they've been doing for decades. Suddenly speaking as though that this is a great revelation they've suddenly realized. And they go, well, actually, it turns out you can't just kill a load of, they've killed less than they said, Hamas fighters than they think. But they said, there's also the fact that more people have joined Hamas since. Really? No shit. No shit.
All right. I mean, it's anybody with a brain was telling you, like, the idea is twofold. One, that it's about Palestine, and two, that I argue whether funding Hamas or simply just creating it by their own violence is in the interest of Zionism. It creates the very thing they point at to justify their existence. All they're hoping for is that the U.S. and everybody else steps in and does the job for them, as they always have. Now, here is the other side of this. It's a great clip. Suppressed News shared this. This is a family of an Israeli prisoner who described the military operation taking place to liberate Israeli prisoners in a simple way on this channel. Now, I'm going to play it for you, even though it's in Hebrew, because I want you to hear her voice. For the podcast, all she's doing is dumping a couple of ping pong balls out and saying, here's what they've gotten back. It's 7 so far. Meanwhile, they've killed, deliberately and otherwise. The number I've thrown out, I think, is 70, but the point is a huge amount of them. And all she's saying is all they had to do was take one of these deals and they could have had all this many back. And it's a good, like, visual example. But listen to her voice, too. They are angry about the Zionist government.
שהצליחו להחזיר בעסקה, ואני דורשת ואומרת לכל מי ששומע אותי, רק עסקה תחזיר את כל הביתה. מבצעים צבאיים יכולים להחזיר...
Military operations can bring back 1 or 2 people. But of course, then you realize it also kills just as many. And I think that's by design. She said, that's not enough for us. That is the leading sentiment right now. So despite what your lying politicians are telling you, the people want something else. But of course, here's Elon Levy coming in with his facts all mixed up, as usual. No, this is actually just funny, though. It's Times of Israel citing rescued hostages, captive soldiers' mom says. It's funny that this keeps happening. Well, they will come out and say, no, I was kidnapped. It was scary, but they gave me food, and it wasn't that crazy because they treated me nice, right? Now, that's not diminishing. That's what they keep saying. And yes, they were kidnapped. That's scary. I think that's important not to diminish. But then the mom comes out 2 weeks later and goes, she spoke to me in the dark room the other day, and she said, this all was rape and murder. And Like, hold on a minute. Like, I guess that's possible. Then you don't want to say it out loud. But then why is every other person, hostage and detainee, coming out going, yeah, no, they were kind of kind to me. And yeah, they protected me when the IDF was about to kill us with their bombs. My biggest fear was IDF bombs. That's what we keep hearing. And the mom changes the story. It just doesn't. And then, of course, here's Elon Levy shifting narrative from they raped and tortured everybody to Hamas enslaves the women. They make me do dishes and make me a cake. That's where we are now. No forgiveness for the apologist for slavery. For slavery? I mean, it's again, I don't think they have fully come to terms with the only people that manipulates are people that already believe what you're saying. A kindergarten level education would make you go, wait, weren't you just saying rape and stuff? And now you're like dishes? Like, how does that line up? You're just moving the goalpost because you're losing control. It's very sad. John Cusack had to say about Benny Gantz, first of all, I don't know if you saw this, but he's come out pretty hot about this. He's admitted that Netanyahu is openly blocking the hostage deals. Again, they hear this in Israel. That's why they're livid right now, based on his own political reasons. Here's what John Cusack had to say. If the truth, or even the appearance of the truth, mattered at all, the Biden administration would cut off the money and the weapons within 30 minutes after this was aired. But we know the owners, donor class, and War Inc. want this. Business is good. Capital is flowing. War is big business. So is incarceration. That's how it works, right? It's, quote, free the money, cage the people, until it becomes free the money, blow up every structure and kill all the people, complete annihilation. Then a moment of silence, a few speeches. Then we start the money spigots flowing and rebuild it. Privatize profits, of course. And so it goes. Rinse, repeat, until the world is dead. It's hard not to see that in this, at least, conversation, he sees it, man. The point is, this is Benny Gantz openly telling it's in Hebrew, telling you Netanyahu is deliberately blocking the exchange for his own benefit, which is, by the way, what everybody has been saying, and it's very clear. This is December 15th, right in the beginning. Destroying Hamas is more important than saving the hostages. I've already showed you this stuff. Here is a CBC article discussing this was 8 months ago. Defeating Hamas is priority. Everything else is secondary. Now, they've clearly tried to hide that now because that's too much on the nose today, but that's what they're doing, and they've always been doing. And I even highlighted this about Gantz saying, I think Israel knows what happened to the members of the Bibas family. The public will know when it will be possible to verify. And my point was like, look, they keep pushing this family as some kind of propaganda purpose. And then the very next day, the family of these two boys were able to be taken on. What about them? Don't forget them. And I simply said, see what I'm saying? Even after Gantz comes out and says that they know what happened to them, which very clearly indicates something bad, the massive push to use them for propaganda purposes only continues. And just so it's clear, I'm not saying I know what happened. The father has stated they were killed. The corporate media, in a backward way, they were essentially forced to admit that the IDF bombings in those locations took their lives. So at the moment, the evidence points very clearly in the direction that they were killed. I hope that's not the case. And yes, Hamas taking them in any case, either way, was a crime. But I find it very strange. I know they hear this. They know what he said. The Elon Levies of the world, they don't care. Mike Rappaport, they tweet about the Bibas family every other day. They're being directed to. Here is a Haaretz article. This is from 2 days ago. Israel knows the fate of the Bibas family, will inform the public at the appropriate time. How else do you take that? If they were alive, they'd be like, yay, they're alive. We can prove it. When it's something that we'll tell you when it's appropriate. I mean, you guys can decide for yourself. I just find it really reprehensible that we're watching them use their memory, even though it seems clear they know they're dead. That's very sad. Here is Ben-Gvir. Israeli Minister Ben-Gvir calling for a rejection of the ceasefire as they pretend they want it. Ethnic cleansing of Gaza, destruction of Hezbollah. These people are lunatics. He says, for victory, we need to enter all of Gaza and fight until victory. So kill everybody, including their own people. For victory, we need to encourage immigration from Gaza. He keeps saying this like he thinks we don't know what he's saying. Yeah, we'll suggest they leave, and if they don't, we'll kill them. It's all good. For victory, we need to enter the north and fight Hezbollah. This guy is dangerous. Here's the other one. Smotrich, Prime Minister. He's talking to Netanyahu. Receive strength from the tens of thousands who are here. Give the order. Wage war on Hezbollah. They will be annihilated if they do this. And I think they know that. They're hoping this will end something or start something. Vanquish, annihilate, and move the security strip from the Galilee into southern Lebanon. Oh, so just illegally occupy more of Lebanon? He publicly says it out loud because they don't care. These guys are lunatics. You're not supposed to say that part because that's illegal. They don't care. Here's Craig Molkeber. The bizarre dance by the U.S. around the ceasefire non-agreement seems to be a cynical effort to, one, shift blame away from Israel's breach of the binding order of the ICJ over Hamas, which, by the way, was binding legally. They were supposed to not go into Rafah. They were supposed to stop what they were doing. They didn't care. Ceasefire and all that. Wrest control, number two, of the process away from the UN back to the U.S. And three, distract the world from Israel's ongoing atrocities. It's not working. I agree. Now, lastly, is the part about humanitarian aid, which I'm going to try to do reasonably quickly, but I think this is really important. Channel 4 News highlights what James Elder was saying from UNICEF. And this is the same thing I've been covering, probably more than anybody from the very beginning. The lie around the humanitarian aid. And I don't want to say more than anybody because I have a really sticky point about this because it's constant. Elon Levy, the Kogat, this way they keep cycling these lies through while they know they're killing people via starvation. And this is the thing I keep saying, and every time I prove it. They're not just going, no, we're giving them enough. They're saying we're giving them more than ever. We're drowning them in aid, even though you can prove the opposite. That is a special kind of evil, guys. Here's what James Elder had to say. And we already talked about this, but this starts this point about what's really going on. They tried to deliver medicine, and they wouldn't let them.
Nutritional crisis here. As you know, on Wednesday, I was part of a convoy, a UNICEF truck, medical and nutritional supplies for 10,000 children going from the middle area to the north to Gaza City, all the paperwork done, all the military approvals from the occupying power. It's laborious, but it's essential. That journey, Christian, would be about 25 miles. It took 13 hours. We spent 8 hours at checkpoints.
13
and
hours.
then eventually the truck with those medical and nutritional supplies for 10,000 girls and boys was denied. It had to return. As I sat there waiting, looking at the coast, looking at fishermen with a single net, these men trying to catch a few fish for their family. As I watched that near the checkpoint, I saw two fishermen shot as they fled, one in the back and one in the neck.
And why was that aid turned around?
Now, he seems to skip past the fishermen. They're both big stories. We'll come back to a thing where he finishes that story and gives you more details on that. But just think about how wild that is. While you're watching them deliberately deny things that people need or dying from not having, they just casually shoot a couple of fishermen because, we can't let them have food. It's that transparent. James has been screaming about the stuff like this. He's been making videos about this left and right, about the starvation, about the killing. Other doctors have spoken out. I mean, the willful ignorance around this is absolutely mind-blowing from the beginning of this. I mean, for 75 years.
No reason given. I don't know. We don't. So frequently, no plausible reason is given. Sometimes no reason is given. I think in this case, it was saying that it was a small enclosed truck and they thought it would be a van. The paperwork I saw said truck/van, and then was sent back and held for hours and hours and hours upon hours, only for the truck to be denied.
So remember what he said. The paperwork that they did go through, which it's always there, said truck van. That's one of the arguments they're going to use, that Kogat is trying to claim he's lying. Because, the group that's supposed to be helping people get fed is actively denying food during a starvation famine campaign. And they're, again, worse than terrorism. Absolutely depraved what they're doing, as Muhammad Shihada highlights. Depraved propaganda. So here's Kogat. This is what they're saying in response. They're literally tagging him. A few pertinent details you forgot to mention, James. One, your truck had a closed back cabin. This is a security concern, as Hamas has used them to smuggle weapons in the past. So, yeah, a cabin that's, as Muhammad's going to point out, delivering things that need to be held cold. So your argument is that's just not allowed because, maybe Hamas could be in there. Or you could actually just do your job and check. But no, you just reflexively turn it back because cabin that we can't, that's designed. They have made these games they can play where they can outwardly go, no, it was the cabin thing. But they do that so you can't bring in what they need. There's another narrative for food, another narrative for medicine. That's how they play this game. Kogat, who is supposed to be coordinating the facilitating of aid for Gaza, is actively denying it under the, working as on behalf of the Israeli Zionist genocide. It says, number 2, closed back cabin trucks require specific coordination. This is not new, but you didn't bother to do the coordination. Yeah, but he did, though. It's all verified. He speaks down about this. He's got all the documentation. They're lying, guys. That's what's so crazy about this. They know he can prove they're lying, and they just don't care. Whatever Kogat is, whoever's behind this, typing this out, should be in front of the Hague. All of them should be. Number 3, at the checkpoint when Kogat officer spoke with you, he says, you lied and said the truck didn't have a closed back cabin. So he drives up with a truck with a closed back cabin, and they're like, you lied. I mean, what does that even mean? It's like they can't think this stuff through. He says, number 4, despite all the duplicity, we still offered to help you complete the transport, but with a different truck. Next time, try adhering to security protocols. As far as I know, that didn't even happen. But either way, the point is, these people are dying as we're talking about this, but we're going to be nitpicky about these things that you, by the way, nobody can even prove. Show me where Hamas is doing any of the stuff you're talking about. Not to say that they haven't, but they haven't proved any of this. So in fact, it effectively comes down to them taking action that kills people by inaction because of something you haven't proven. Here's what Hamid says. Number 1, you cannot bring medicine in an open truck in 100-degree weather. The closed back cabin is for cooling. That's self-evident. Number 2, there is zero evidence Hamas ever tried to smuggle weapons in a closed back cabin. They're not idiots to try so through the most scrutinized, vetted border in the world when they have smuggling tunnels and plenty of your unexploded bombs to recycle. Isn't that what they're saying? Aren't they telling us they built some utopia tunnel system under the whole? But they're going to jam inside of a UN truck. They're just trying to create the idea that UN trucks are Hamas vehicles. It's a flimsy and not thought through lie. His point is, why would they jam themselves in the back of a truck that they know they're going to check at the most surveilled checkpoint in the entire area when they have tunnel systems that I've even told you? I showed you that National Geographic article from like decades ago where they're talking about these tunnels being completely acknowledged by Israel and Egypt because of smuggling, and they're all making money off it. They know that's there. They know what's going on. That is a manufactured lie that's playing on the ignorance of people watching. Number 3, he says, how can he lie and say the truck doesn't have a closed back cabin when you can see it with your own eyes? It's like driving up in a van and being like, no, this is a car. And they go, you lied. What does it even mean? Are we to believe that he just was like, no, this is not a truck? It's not even worth engaging with. These people are ridiculous. Number 4, your offer to help unload medicines on an open truck to bake in the sun would have rendered those medicines useless, which is probably the point. This is Kogat for you. Don't forget the whole Kogat game about the bakeries. One of the main earliest ones I caught was when Elon Levy, Kogat, Oren Atrovsky, I think, and the rest of them all shared the 20 operational bakeries, and they got caught lying because Nusrat was destroyed. The one they put in the picture, it was a lie. And it all stemmed back to Kogat. Kogat's the one that put that out. Elon shared it. Oren shared it. And it even got a Twitter fact check. It said, nope, that's not true. So right there, you can easily prove Kogat was lying about the bakeries. I might as well just find it. Like I bring it up. It's right here. There they are. And of course, this one, oh, look at that. It looks like they removed the thing. If you hold on, let me do that. You guys, of course, I'm going to take more time on this now. Here it is. This is interesting, actually, because this whole time, see, I'm telling you, Twitter is acting in the interest of the fake news for Israel. Let me prove it. So here was this one. This one's still here. I'm surprised that's still there. So this very clearly says the bakery in this video was bombed and destroyed in October, killing 3. And here's Oren Barksy saying, there's no famine. Here's all this bread in Nusrat. Look at all the bread. Claiming it's February. Oops, it was destroyed in October. You're a liar. But where did he get it from? Oh, he got it from Kogat. What does Kogat say? Oh, okay, no, that is still here. That's weird. So why isn't this one then? 20 bakeries are operational. It's the same video, guys. It's the same thing. They're showing you the same fake information, claiming it's now happening, right? Anyway, the bottom line is This one is the point. As you can see, it just says stay informed. And you hit find more out. It doesn't show you anything. It just gives you terms of service. But they lied. They posted it. But Twitter gives them a soft version of it. Orange shares their same video. And it says, nope, fake news. That's not real. So the point is, Kogat provably put out something they knew was a fake story. They lied about it. They lied. Now, the bottom line is, Elon Levy shared the same damn thing. Oops. I'll include this one. Here is how he's continuing. I just thought it was important to show you Kogat being caught. And there's also the one where they got caught saying, here's this big market. And then people caught that the banner in the background showed you it was during times when there was school, which means it was before October 7th. I mean, they lie and lie and lie and lie. That's all they do. Here's Kogat with the same thing. Here's some details you forgot. Elon couldn't let it go and says, this is a recurring pattern. International agencies muck up. By what? By you returning things that they need to bring in for people to be, I mean, muck up is your game you're playing with the delivery of aid. Then they blame Israel to cover up their incompetence. Right, because Israel's shown themselves to be so competent, right? That's all. That's the best he can do. Just go, you're a liar. It's all your fault. Like, why do they think statements on Twitter are convincing anybody when you've got James on the ground showing you what's going on? When you've got evidence that they're actively blocking aid? Here's James' response, by the way. I'll play it for you. I said, it's important to understand that Kogat Online is just another arm of the Israeli propaganda effort. They've been caught lying about aid during a manufactured famine and living conditions in Gaza countless times, just since October 7th. Here, on June 15th, UNICEF spokesman James Elder describes this day-long attempt.
Whilst they keep discussing whether or not the people here in Gaza will get a ceasefire, we, the United Nations, will keep delivering supplies as much as we can. This is a truck, medical supplies, as you see there in Arabic, and nutrition supplies, preventative and curative, heading to the north.
All the needed approvals, which again, look at his information. These went through the check processes, confirmed the truck van, all of it. They're just playing games when he's trying to bring it across. Convo was forced to wait for more than 5 hours near a military checkpoint. Even just that, explain that. For what purpose? If they're supposed to be being checked down the line, why are they waiting there for 5 hours? Why did it take them 13 hours to go 25 miles? Because they're trying to stop this.
We are still unable to go, still explosions. We are now no truck. If you notice, no truck. That is the medical supplies. That is the nutritional supplies for 10,000 people. It was denied. After all the approvals, it's denied. It's gone back. 5 hours here, we'll have to do the same. 10,000 people will not get those medical and nutritional supplies that they so urgently need. Another aid restriction, another aid denial.
This is all that keeps happening. Now, I mean, look, let's just even take it a step further and say, let's just say everything they're saying is true, and it's verifiably not. At what point do you start going, okay, if you pretend you care about the people suffering, let's just get past all of these little small nuance. And look, the game they're playing that it's all because Hamas might X, Y, and Z. Hamas, the idea that you're holding Gaza back because Hamas could, I mean, that means everything. We can't let food through because Hamas will eat it. We can't let aid, Gaza through because Hamas can patch up their wounds. That's what they're doing. Well, then that means you're not letting anything through because anything they can use, so can Hamas. But that's all they're doing. And it's been shown by CNN, by the BBC. They're holding back crutches and all sorts of things that people need. Okay, here is, by the way, him going further on this fisherman. So for those people that are dismissing this as fake news because, he made the mistakes. Okay, then why did they execute fishermen while he was standing there? The people are maniacs. The ones that are doing this are deliberately starving people. They are killing innocent people. The evidence is overwhelmingly obvious. It is abundant. It's everywhere. As I just highlighted what he said, that while he was waiting, they shot him in front of him. And here he is going further on that with just audio.
We sat for hours and hours waiting. I watched fishermen try and catch a fish in a net with a single net, men by themselves. And I saw two men shot dead as they were fleeing.
You saw men shot dead in front of you who were fishing at the time?
Yes.
Nothing
in
new.
the clearest sense, yes. We were not far from a very, very significant checkpoint. Israeli military checkpoint. We were there for hours, so I was watching the fishermen just on the shoreline, just men, probably university professors and engineers with a single net each, about 8 of them. Suddenly we heard a tank coming down, we heard fire. I don't have a military background, but automatic fire. Saw 2 men on the beach, 2 fishermen fleeing. One was shot in the back, one in the neck. I know this because the United Nations, there were other convoys with us. The World Health Organization with paramedics immediately called through to the military to get approval to go there, to try and give them health, medical.
Yes, you have to call to get approval to go help the people that are in need, which many times is denied. Or you get shot when you go help, which happens all the time, which is also another war crime. The idea that they just shoot them in the back. Guys, that's a crime for a militant, for crying out loud. It's just, this is blatant criminality.
Health support, that was denied. That was denied to give them that. Eventually, the other fishermen were allowed to go there with body bags and retrieve them. And it's when they brought them that I saw the wounds, one in the back, one in the neck, and fishing netting stuck around one of them's leg. If ever you needed further evidence that these men were fishermen.
Apparently nothing is too much. Now here's a longer version of James speaking with Owen Jones. So make sure you check that out. It always does that. It always shows me that I'm not following when I look back here. Oh, look, now it's right. But it's about a 25-minute interview. He just goes into the same conversation, but it's longer in depth if you want to check it out. Now here's Elon Levy making the point that I was saying earlier. June 13th. After what we're talking about, Israel is flooding Gaza with so much aid. The UN is drowning in it. This is what he's saying. Kogat lying on the 13th. 228 trucks crossing into Gaza. That's a blatant lie. Blatant. Even saying only 70 were collected is also a lie. These numbers are just fabricated nonsense. And whether we're talking to the UN or other entities around it or people on the ground, it's provable. Now, here's the one that I always show, despite their thing, well, UN can't be trusted. Well, there's 1,000 other. The point right now is that whether we're looking at the famine on the ground, whether we're looking at the way that aid is distributed through the area, whether we're looking about what's going through the crossing, or whether we're looking at what's even being delivered to it, at every stage you can prove, according to corporate media, according to international entities, that they're lying about this. That shouldn't need to convince you. I think you all already understand. But I think this one updates every week. So I think we're going to get another one soon, but this is as of June 9th, okay? Or June 10th, and then the 9th is the day that the data stops. Here's what's important that I haven't stressed before. So first, of course, before October 7th, 500 aid trucks, including fuel, was the average. And then at that time, they were already food insecure. So below that will only increase the food insecurity, right? So on October 7th, when they immediately shut it down to near zero for the first couple of weeks, that spun them into famine immediately, or in the direction of famine. Because anything less than 500 on average is less. I mean, so right now the point is they've never crossed that. Down here on the bottom is the average. That's 9 a day in October, 83 a day average in November, 97 in December. So this has been a guaranteed slow roll into famine. Whatever your thoughts about why we've got into UNRWA and the reality of the right of return and refugee status, they're lying to you about all of this. But regardless of whether you think it's necessary, it is the reality. And they're dependent on this aid. And the bottom line is they have manufactured an illusion to make it look like they're doing all. They usually dump a huge number in one spot in one day. That's not what's happening now. I can prove it. My point is that they have done that in the past and then pointed at it and go, look at all the trucks. Well, the point is, if you're doing 97 on average a day throughout the month, you're still putting them into starvation. You're still forcing them into famine. Now in June, they're down to 80. And they're also down to only 2 crossings again. They only have West Erez and Karim Shalom open. That's it. 80 on average. That's it. That's from 500 down to 80. Now, here's the point. That is not trucks dropped off and ready to be taken by the UN, you understand. That is incoming truckloads. I haven't stressed this before. It's important because this means that when they claim they're flooding them in aid and the UN just can't handle it, and they lie and say, we've brought in 220 trucks. They're lying to you. They're lying in every possible way. The reality being that they've averaged 80 a day incoming. Not delivered, but incoming. And even realize then the point is the reason they have those trucks with the thing tearing up the road behind them is so they can't deliver it, even if they manage to get it away from their 45-hour checkpoints. It's just so disgustingly obvious. And in this, by the way, is a lot of other damning information that you should check out. But I think that's powerful. No matter what time you look at, March, April, May, they've never even gone over 200 average a day. That is a guaranteed reality. They are starving them by design in hopes that you just don't understand. Now, here's Haaretz, also showing you the other side. The U.S. is now to impose sanctions, which they'll probably pull back when Smotrich yells mad words at Biden, and he's just like last time and quietly pulls back the sanctions. But that's sanctions on right-wing Israeli groups that are attacking aid convoys, because that's totally not happening, right? We're flooding them in aid, except your own people are on the other side also stopping it. So whose fault is it? They're the ones beating up aid drivers. They're the ones shooting at people. And just like you are shooting at people you claim are Hamas when really they're just aid workers trying to help or policemen trying to guard it. Then you claim no one's keeping track of it. No one's guarding it because you shot them all. They're afraid. And then the World Food Program says we can't even do it because you're shooting us. They're manufacturing this, and it's the most obvious thing in the world. They should go to prison for stuff like this. You can read this for yourself. U.S. imposes sanctions on these right-wing Israeli groups, which shows you that even the U.S. is being forced to admit, yeah, they're not only illegally acting, they're blocking aid and doing it, by the way, as you can prove, with the support of the IDF. They're guarding them as they do it. Here's a Saul Rod highlighting the back and forth. Former Israeli spokesman, and I showed you this one, says if you're hungry in the north, the whole Gaza Strip is 25 miles long. If there are food shortages in the north, you can walk 20 minutes. Showing his ignorance. Bad math there, buddy. Doesn't matter, though. It's not 20 minutes. The point is, current UNICEF spokesman, it took me 13 hours to go 25 miles in Gaza. Then they turned it back anyway and shot fishermen. Yeah, how's that working out? Just walk a little bit, you lazy starvation people. Think about how... there's not a word that really encapsulates how evil that is. And there are plenty. It's not enough for me. The idea that you're blaming them for what you're manufacturing, like they're just going, you're just lazy. Why don't you just walk a little bit, lazy? Like that's what he's doing. As he's quoting a tweet that says starvation has returned to the north. Why don't you just walk? I mean, it's just maybe because you'll shoot them along the way, maybe because there's bombs and traps along the way that you've laid for them, or fake cans that look like food that blow up in their face, or the fact that you'll bomb the crossing areas that are on the way there, or bomb the new safe area. How about that? Or the fact that there's no food to find in much anywhere right now, despite the lies. And this is not an answer to that. Well, walk. Well, here's why. You can just walk 20 minutes. Well, guess what they do as you're walking 20 minutes? They do this. And you've seen this before. Sadly.
هذا
Oh, right when it happens.
وكل هذا والمسيرة
Walking along the path, just bombed it for no reason. Right? That's what happens. Here is Saul Santaforth highlighting what this, I forget this was. We played this already. A representative at the UN is just reading exactly what a report highlighting the starvation and how a helpless father was forced to watch his son die in front of him.
Last night, a Palestinian father sat powerless by the bedside of his 2-month-old baby, watching him die slowly of hunger. After searching for hours and days for baby formula in northern Gaza, to no avail.
Matsim highlights this boy, Mustafa Hijazi, has passed away due to a lack of food and medicine in Gaza. It's all over the place, guys, and it's not unique right now. We showed you this one. Children are literally starving to death. As I tag Elon Levy, Aviva Klampas, or this is Arsen Atrovsky, the fake human rights lawyer, David Collier, Michael Rappaport, Eli David, and Mazig, both of which block me now. And all the other overtly racist Zionist supporters are not only cheering on this genocide, but pretending they're delivering more food than ever. I think it's important that we call them out. Here's a Saul Rod highlighting the pier. The U.S. pier has delivered more headlines than food. Well put. the U.S. to sideline Gaza Pier and suspend aid deliveries again. And she highlighted the way it should read: U.S. PR stunt fails, suspend aid, or rather, and as Israel starves Gaza. Exactly. Here's the article you can read. The Pentagon will again sideline its floating pier off of Gaza coast. Guys, this is easy to understand. Just like anybody honest was at least predicting, they did not plan to use it at all because Israel from the beginning was set to be the one processing. They knew the reason it wasn't happening over there was because Israel was the one processing. That's why. So they set this up to fail. Rather, they set this up. It's one of two things, I bet. Either that this was Biden and his administration being played by Israel, as all too often happens, convincing them they needed it for some reason and then using it to execute their own people, many American hostages as well as American Palestinians who got killed in all of this, right? And I mean, clearly, I've argued that was probably not what the U.S. thought was going to happen because it was very, very loud. Like they've been trying to play this where they're kind of not really involved. That was hard to miss. So either they were manipulated by the Israeli government to make them more publicly complicit to help them in their agenda, or the U.S. is just that complicit and didn't care. Either way, the pier was never about helping anybody. And now it's paused, I guess. It's just disgusting. And Caitlin Johnstone highlights the only reason they claim is apparently there were some waves. Sure, who could have expected waves in the ocean, you know? They're really trying to say that they built this extremely expensive floating pier without anticipating the possibility there might be some waves in the ocean. How embarrassing. That's how dumb they think we are. And the Israeli army announces a tactical ceasefire in Rafah. This was as of yesterday. From 8 a.m. to 7 p.m., they say, along the axis where humanitarian aid is transported from the Karim Shalom crossing. Oh, okay. You mean the place where Elon Levy says that it's all the UN, just can't get it done, right? I guess they're not coordinating with the former spokesman. You know why? Because this clearly marks, as he writes, the first official Israeli acknowledgement that the army is targeting aid trucks and routes, or at the very least, that they're the block. Right? So if you're announcing a tactical ceasefire in order to allow this aid to go by, and the only thing changing is you're no longer present, what do you think that shows? And it's the Karim Shalom crossing. That's where he's talking about right now. That's the only other one, that one in the, I forget the name, but that's the one Elon was referencing. Pretty damn clear. Here is what the AP says. Israel's army says it will pause daytime fighting along a route in southern Gaza to help the flow of aid. Right, the aid that they have been blocking. Now, I think this is something very important. This shows us that this is at least trying to throw a bone, right? Going like they clearly have been stopping aid this whole time. So allowing it to go through is not what they want. This is about trying to convince people or at least lessen the problem. Release valve. Oh yeah, it's hold on. Did that for a reason so I could find this here. Yeah, so it says the army said that the daily pause would begin at 8 a.m. and last until 7 p.m. and continue until further notice, which again, so what? So they'll just kill them around those hours and take the food from them? I mean, it's just obviously this is only a ploy. It's aimed at allowing aid trucks to reach the nearby Israel-controlled Karim Shalom crossing, the main entry point, and travel safely to the Shalah al-Din highway, a main road, north-south road, the military said. The crossing has been a bottleneck since Israeli ground troops moved into Rafah. I don't know how you misunderstand that. They're the ones blocking what's happening. And you remove them, and now it seems like it'll be fixed. That's what they're saying anyway. It says Kogat, the completely lying entity pretending to be a humanitarian aid group, the Israeli military body that oversees aid distribution, said the route would increase the flow of aid to other parts of Gaza, despite the fact they've torn up all the roads to stop trucks from getting through. So even if they do let it through, I bet you they're going to go, look, they can't even do it. I'm going to blame them for the fact that they've destroyed all the roads. But it says the coastal area of Mawasi and Khan Yunis is where they keep saying is safe, but they keep bombing. It says, I think that was it. Oh yeah, just the a UN spokesman, Jens Larky, told AP that Israel's announcement was welcome, but no aid has been dispatched from the Karim Shalom today with no details. He said the UN hopes for further concrete measures by Israel. So the point is, despite this lie, the whole day's gone by and they're like, but nothing's happened yet. Even with your pause, we haven't seen any aid. You know why? Because apparently there's a little bit of confusion going on as they all say something different, which just shows you that they're divided. This is a game from one side, and the other people are like, no aid. Kill them all. That's what's happening. Goes on to say, but neither Netanyahu nor the army canceled the new arrangement, so it seems to be confusion. While the army insisted there's no cessation of fighting in southern Gaza, it's also said the new route will be open during the daytime hours, quote, exclusively for the transportation of humanitarian aid. So here's what I read that as, which, by the way, even though they did this, there hasn't been aid coming through. When they're saying there's no stopping the fighting, well, they're probably just going to shoot anybody that comes through, claiming they're Hamas. But we're letting aid through, but just not Hamas. It's the same game now in the roads. That's what I read into it anyway. Or this was just a divided Israeli government. But it says the fighting continued. 9 people, including 5 children, were killed today when a house was struck in I forgot to look this up. Bariji in central Gaza. Let me know in the chat how that's pronounced. It's another refugee camp, according to AP journalists who counted the bodies at Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital. A man weeping over a small sheet wrapped in bundles in his arm. Right, so as they're pretending there's a pause, they're murdering children. You know, typical Israeli stuff. It says the flow of aid in southern Gaza has declined just as need grew, despite Elon shrieking about the lies of food. More than 1 million Palestinians, many of whom have already been displaced, fled Rafah after the invasion, crowded into other parts of southern and central Gaza. Most languish in tent camps with open sewage in the streets. It's all by manufactured design, guys. They are forcing them into worse and worse positions and blaming them for what happens. And from May 6th until June 6th, the UN received an average of 68 trucks of aid a day. That was down from 168 in April and far below the 500 a day that aid groups were saying were needed before October 7th. In fact, what they claimed was 1,000 because it was 500 before that was already under the siege was already in place, you understand. The lies of October 7th forward are all games they're playing. They imposed this siege since I think like 2006 or a long time ago. It says Kogat says there are no restrictions on the entry of trucks. They're lying, of course, as they just admitted otherwise. So here's Kogat speaking to AP, just lying without even coordinating with the other lies. They're admitting to blocking it. Their IDF are standing with the settlers that block it. But it says more than 8,600 trucks of all kinds, both aid and commercial, entered Gaza from all crossings from May 2nd to June 13th, an average of 201 a day. Isn't that stupid? So they're admitting right there that, and by the way, that's not even the average, the number is 168 or something. The point is that that's less than half of what was needed to maintain a situation that was already food insecure. So even when they admit it, they're still proving that or even when they lie, they're still proving to you that they're starving people. But it says, but much of that's piled up at the crossings, they said. I'm surprised AP didn't add that. They seem to be going at this a little bit. A Kogat spokesman said it was the UN's fault that the cargo stacked up on the Karim Shalom crossing. See my point? He said its agencies have fundamental logistic problems that they have not fixed. The UN, of course, denies that. It says the fighting often makes it too dangerous for the UN trucks inside Gaza and to travel to Karim Shalom. It means they are shooting at them. It also says the pace of deliveries has been slowed because the Israeli military must authorize the drivers to travel to the site, a system Israel says was designed for their safety. Oh, so look at that. So the point is, yes, there is something they're doing after that. And but it's for safety, though. But that's not what you just said. Kogat just said, that's it. There's nothing else. The other one's stopping it. Point is, they have to supposedly authorize the driver and won't let them travel to these sites if they're not so they just go, nope, not you. So apparently not anybody or no trucks. It's all under the guise of keeping this in the way they want it to. You know, starvation. Now, Elijah Manier highlights the point about the supposed block or the temporary pause for aid. Again, for Karim Shalom, which then also clearly shows you that them being out of the picture will allow the aid to continue to go through. I mean, it's just so clear. He says, but Israel's in total confusion. The Israeli army announced a tactical ceasefire. This was this morning, but later doubled down saying the war will continue after a storm in the political leadership. Probably got screamed at by Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. It says the army has had enough of this war and it's realistic about its capabilities and the lack of achievable goals. The politicians, however, are clinging to their positions in the government, and the end of war means the end of their rule. Big and important bickering. It's very interesting. Now, Mossad commentary, interestingly, first came out and said the IDF will pause those areas to allow the aid to get through. Again, it's so obvious to me. Then they followed up later and go, oh, hello, hold on. The move was not approved by anyone from the political level, including the prime minister. And so that means, as he just highlighted, that the military made a unilateral choice, contradicting the political side. Look at that division. That's crazy. At the moment, the decision is not approved and is not being carried out. Wow. Division shows you, I mean, they're losing in every way. Now they're eating themselves alive. The point is, they are still starving people. Asal Rod highlights the headline, IDF will begin tactical pause. Article, Netanyahu says it's unacceptable. IDF confirms no change. And of course, this is just showing you the articles. He says, like clockwork, Western media outlets have reported on Israel's tactical pause, but not a single one mentioned their statements in Hebrew which deny the pause is even happening. It's just so gross how these corporate media platforms are so willfully dishonest. Now, I'm going to end with this discussion. It's a good clip. There is a growing number of Jews calling out Zionism and Israeli government war crimes. Be on the right side of history. Yeah, hashtag never again, which means for anybody, guys. Now, you can let this only it's 2 minutes, 41 seconds. You can listen to it. I think there was something in there that I personally disagree with. The point is not generally about every point, but showing you that there are Israelis, but Jews or Israeli Jews around the world who are calling this out, who are saying not just, now we should stop, but it's always been wrong. What they're doing is wrong. And it's time for people to have the courage to call it out. And I believe it's already happening because of people like you watching, having the courage to stand up and make your to say what you think is right at a time when it's being attacked. Thank you for doing so. Thank you for having the courage to fight for people that don't have a voice or, are being suppressed at the very least. So thank you for tuning in today. A little longer than I was planning, but I still think it's important to get all this out there, guys. I don't know. I'm going to be aiming for tomorrow to probably do that nanotechnology show. We'll see where we get, but more coming your way as always. Thank you so much for your continued support for this platform. It's important that we continue to call this stuff out because I personally find we do to be in a very specific niche that very few seem to meet. There's a lot of platforms out there that I believe are nonpartisan and objective, but very few that do the long form, deep dive kind of breakdown of this stuff. There's plenty of them though. I'm saying there's not, but there's just, it's a smaller group out there. So thank you for your support because I know it takes time to watch. I know there's important information in here that needs to be seen in a longer way. But as always, clip these things out if you like. You don't need my permission. Break these things down, make clips, share them with your friends, have conversations about this stuff, especially if you disagree. It's important to flesh this out. Now, I recently had a great show with the Tinfoil Hat podcast. We talked about a lot of crazy stuff. I just talked with Allison Morrow. I have much more interviews coming up in general. I'm going to be doing an interview with Brad Miller coming up soon, I believe, for Pirate Stream. And on that note, by the way, the only reason that's been taking so long for us to get going back again was both the up in the air stuff with the studio and all that just happened with everything we were dealing with. And then because of that, Courtney's been going overseas and doing a lot of other work and so on. And so we're waiting to reconnect once we get the studio set for that as well. But I believe I'm going to have Brad Miller come in the studio so we can talk about a lot of the different stuff he's been dealing with in regard to the military and the COVID-19 vaccination conversation. And just because I think I like his work and I believe he's, a good man. And I think it's to highlight what he's been through and have that conversation, but more coming your way in general. So thank you for being here. As always, I love you guys. Question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.